Title: Becoming a God Against the Heavens. Author: 3-inch Little Mushroom. Introduction. Holy Soul Village remains as humble as ever, but everything changes when Shi Feng awakens a martial spirit unlike any the Douluo continent has ever known. Born from the very grudges of heaven and earth, this spirit feeds on blood, rejects samsara, and spurns the fires of hell. A living scourge of lightning, it grants Shi Feng immortality, banishing him beyond the 6 realms of reincarnation, never to die or suffer annihilation. At first glance, the simplest path for Shi Feng would have been to follow Tang San. Yet fate wove a different tale, steering him into the ranks of the Spirit Hall. Though he felt a pang of regret at joining such a mighty organization, he quickly discovered its allure. The enchanting master Bibi Dong, the delicate and spirited Xiaoxue, and a senior sister whose beauty and cunning set hearts racing. Thus begins Shi Feng's journey, a tale of power, intrigue, and the divine spark that rises against the heavens. Chapter 1. The Plague God of Holy Soul Village. Congratulations on surviving yet another calamity. You have been awarded a bottle of Thunder Tribulation liquid and a Spirit Ring upgrade coupon. Shi Feng rolled his eyes at the disembodied voice echoing in his head. As the faint cloud of energy, Jian, dissipated above him, he muttered in exasperation, "When will this endless thunderstorm finally let up?" On the Douluo continent, in the southwestern reaches of the Tiando Empire, lies Facino Province. Tucked into its rolling hills is Holy Soul Village, a quiet settlement that at dawn is stirred to life by the crowing of roosters. The moon, once brilliant and full, now faded to a ghostly sliver as the first pale light of morning crept across the sky. At the village's northern edge stood its most secluded homestead, a simple courtyard ringed by low walls, and atop those walls sat a little boy of 5 or 6, silhouetted against the dim glow of dawn. With each cockcrow he blinked awake, but the sight of him was enough to send chills down any onlooker's spine. The moment he opened his eyes, they revealed only deep, ink-black irises. No whites, no pupils, just 2 pools of darkness that seemed to exhale a faint, ominous mist. Who, or what, was this child, and why did his gaze feel so deathly? Holy Soul Village was about to learn the answer. The strange vision vanished almost as soon as it appeared, and reality snapped back into focus. Perched on the ridge of a tiled roof, Shi Feng rose to his feet and studied the pale dawn sky. His short black hair was neatly trimmed, his simple robes unadorned. His skin carried a faint pallor, but his eyes burned with a cold, razor-sharp intensity that seemed to constrict the very air around him. A flicker of movement at the village gate caught his attention. He twisted on the rooftop, dropped to the ground in a single, fluid motion, then launched himself toward the distant hillside. "That brat Tang San's off to train on the mountain again," he murmured under his breath. "I wonder how far his Xuanqian Kung Fu has advanced. If I time it right, Su Yuntao should arrive here any moment." As he ran, the hardness in his gaze gave way to eager anticipation. This was Shi Feng, a boy of Holy Soul Village, yet never truly one of them. From the day he could walk, the villagers had treated him like a curse. Mothers pulled their children close at the mere mention of his name. Rumors called him the Broom Star or the God of Pestilence, claiming that anyone, human or beast, who crossed his path would meet with ill fate. And so Shi Feng kept his distance, his sharp eyes always watching, always waiting. "Take this." Shi Feng arched his back, his joints popping audibly as he flexed. A wicked grin spread across his face, and without hesitation he leapt from the roof several meters above. He hit the ground as softly as a wraith, utterly unscathed. Any onlooker would have stared in disbelief. How could a 6-year-old not only climb onto a rooftop, but also jump off like that? Shi Feng dusted himself off, ready to hum a victorious tune, when a flicker of movement at the far corner of the yard caught his eye. The 2 plump pheasants in the chicken coop stood eerily still. "My pheasants!" he gasped, rushing forward. He thrust his hand through the slats, feeling the cold, rigid bodies. They were dead, so completely lifeless there was no denying it. Shi Feng's triumphant smile faltered as he stared at the ruined birds. "What a waste," he whispered, heartbroken. Strangely, a faint, inky mist seeped from the 2 pheasants, coalescing around Shi Feng's palms before vanishing into his body. As the mist drained away, the once plump birds withered, their feathers loose and their flesh shriveled, as though every drop of life had been sucked out. Cradling the lifeless corpses, Shi Feng stepped out into the courtyard. The sight froze his breath. Not a single blade of grass stirred in the parched earth, which was split by a network of jagged cracks. No sign of life remained. Nothing like the rest of Holy Soul Village. From the pheasant's sudden demise to this eerie desolation, it was all his doing. Unbeknownst to him, a strange aura radiated from Shi Feng whenever his emotions flared. The weakest creatures died instantly, the stronger ones fell gravely ill. Even the ground itself seemed to buckle under the pressure. Whispers spread through the village. Some called him the plague god, others the broom star, believing misfortune followed in his wake. Despite the loss of the two birds, Shi Feng's natural optimism surfaced. He shook off his guilt, determined to lay them to rest properly. With that resolve, he turned away from the silent, cracked courtyard and headed beyond the village's gates, ready to give the pheasants the peace they'd been denied. Shi Feng didn't go straight home. Instead, he sprinted down to the river just outside the village. The two pheasants he'd caught yesterday were gone, so he figured he might as well grab some fish before heading back. It was the perfect time to strengthen his body. He refused to be like Tang San, who buried himself in cultivation at the expense of his own health. Compared to Tang San's slender frame, Shi Feng's muscles were full and well-developed from hard work and exercise. Wading into the cool current, Shi Feng slipped his hands beneath the surface, searching for fish. 30 minutes later, he emerged from the water carrying 3 hefty fish strung through the gills on a length of straw. He held them carefully at chest height so their tails wouldn't drag on the ground. Halfway up the gentle hill where Tang San liked to train, Shi Feng paused and spotted him descending from the summit. "Hey, Tang San," he called out. Tang San froze for a heartbeat, then forced a smile. "Shi Feng, you're up early." Shi Feng approached with a grin, but Tang San's smile faltered. He took a small step back, his eyes darting away. "No, stay back!" Tang San flailed his arms, panic flickering in his eyes. Ever since Shi Feng's poisonous touch had swept through the village, everyone, children, adults, even the livestock, had fallen ill. Tang San himself, despite the protective shield granted by his Taoist Xuantian Kung, had nearly collapsed under that same deadly chill. He could still feel the cold aura Shi Feng had unleashed slamming into him. Without his body's defenses, he would surely have been gravely poisoned. That morning was the worst. Just as Tang San began his usual climb up the mountain to practice, he caught Shi Feng slipping down the slope. Tang San's nostrils flared with anger, for this was no ordinary hill. It was barely 100 meters high. Yet when Shi Feng had descended, the summit and 30 meters of surrounding flora stood withered and yellow, as if every trace of life had been sucked dry. Ever since then, Tang San's cultivation at the peak had suffered. The aura he drew from that sacred spot dwindled dramatically, and only after several months did the mountain's vitality finally restore itself. Shi Feng curled his lips, fully aware that Tang San remembered the incident. He hurried to explain that he'd never meant to cause harm. He'd simply been curious about the secluded clearing where Tang San meditated in secret and had decided to test out his own techniques there. In the process, his internal energy had surged out of control, devastating the vegetation. Now, faced with Tang San's stern gaze, Shi Feng felt an awkward sting of embarrassment at having inadvertently ruined another practitioner's cherished training ground. "I caught a few fish this morning, so here, take one." Shi Feng didn't move closer. He simply flung a hefty fish toward Tang San. In one fluid motion, Tang San reached out, caught it midair, and locked it firmly in his hands. "Thanks," Tang San said, cradling the nearly 10-pound catch. They stood barely 5 meters apart when Shi Feng's dark, jewel-like eyes suddenly brightened. His gaze sharpened, zeroing in on Tang San's warm, healthy neck. Shi Feng swallowed, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet morning air. He could almost hear the rush of blood beneath Tang San's skin, the steady pulse of the artery at his throat calling out to him. Tang San caught the sudden intensity in Shi Feng's expression and shivered. A cold wave swept up his spine, setting every hair on end and leaving his scalp tingling. "Hey, I need to get back and help with breakfast," Tang San said, taking a step back. Clutching the fish, he turned on his heel and sprinted toward Holy Soul Village, leaving Shi Feng standing alone at the water's edge. Chapter 2. The Abandoned Son. Damn it, why am I starving again? Shi Feng muttered, wiping the sticky drool from the corner of his mouth. He closed his eyes, steadying his breath as he activated a simple suppression technique, forcing the gnawing hunger down. If Tang San's father caught him like this, he'd probably swing his hammer in frustration. Back at his small courtyard, Shi Feng set aside one of the 2 fish he'd just caught. He carefully cleaned and scaled the other, methodically removing its entrails before rinsing it in a wooden basin. Fish was all he had to eat these days, but at least he'd learned to hunt well enough to fill his own belly. With the cleaned fish tucked under his arm, he made his way toward the village head's residence. Old Jack, as everyone called him, had been Shi Feng's first and only savior. When Shi Feng was just 3 years old, he had accidentally triggered a dark cultivation technique that coated his aura in a poisonous miasma. Wherever he went, people fell ill. The whole village came to believe he was some sort of plague god. Even old Jack had succumbed to the sickness. But instead of abandoning the boy altogether, the old man chose exile over death. He assigned Shi Feng the farthest courtyard on his land, a lonely, dilapidated building no one else would touch, and let him live there in solitude. Shi Feng never held a grudge. He understood the fear he'd inspired, and he'd paid for it with years of isolation and bitter loneliness. In return, he threw himself into cultivation with single-minded determination. Over time, his control over that poisonous aura improved until it no longer harmed the villagers. Better still, his growing spiritual power enabled him to hunt, fish, and forage, skills he used to provide for himself. Now, knife in hand and fish in tow, Shi Feng felt a pang of genuine gratitude. He knocked on Elder Jack's door, ready to repay the kindness that had saved his life, if only by sharing the day's catch. Shi Feng had once returned from the forest laden with game, hoping to share his hunt with the villagers, only to have every gift coldly refused. Fear of him ran so deep that no one dared accept his offerings, convinced that misfortune would follow in their wake. All but 2 households steered clear, Old Jack and the San family. Each time Shi Feng presented fresh venison to Old Jack, the old man beamed with gratitude, and Tang San's kin, less superstitious than the rest, quietly made room at their table for his bounty. Wherever Shi Feng went, people avoided him. Laundry women paused mid-rinse and averted their eyes. Field hands dropped their hoes rather than share the path. Even children, newly released from play, scattered as he approached, some hurling stones from a safe distance in defiance, though none could land a single hit. "He's a curse on this village," the women hissed behind cupped hands. One afternoon, as a cluster of youngsters jeered from across the road, Shi Feng halted and turned his head with a sudden, coiled intensity. He took a half-step forward, and the children shrieked, stones forgotten, bolting like startled birds. Their cries echoed down the lane as Shi Feng watched them flee, silent, unmoving, and once again entirely alone. Shi Feng shook his head with a wry smile. "Still trying to rattle me with that little bravado?" He always got a kick out of teasing the old man. Old Jack's cottage stood near the heart of the village, only a short stroll from Shi Feng's place. At this hour, the morning sun had climbed high enough that the old fellow would be out in his yard, soaking up the warmth. Sure enough, a bamboo recliner sat beneath the window, and Old Jack was dozing peacefully in its gentle rays. "Grandpa Jack!" Shi Feng called as he strolled up the path. Startled, Old Jack shot to his feet, hurried to the gate, and slammed it shut. He backed away a few paces, exhaling a shaky sigh of relief. Unperturbed, Shi Feng advanced to the locked gate and stopped. "Grandpa Jack, I brought you some fresh fish." Old Jack peered at him from about 5 meters away, still reluctant to come closer. Then, mustering his composure, he called out, "You're too kind, Shi Feng. Just hang them on the hook by the door. I'll bring them in later." Shi Feng carefully hung the last fish on the doorknob and paused, studying the small walled compound he'd called home for the past 3 years. A soft wave of nostalgia washed over him. This place, and the grizzled man within it, had saved his life when he was nothing more than a frail infant, abandoned outside Notting City's gates. Old Jack, the only father Shi Feng had ever known, discovered him swaddled in rags on a rainy morning. The boy was so tiny he looked no larger than a field mouse, and his breath came in the faintest whispers. Jack thought the child wouldn't last the night. Yet against all odds, he grew stronger with each passing day. Villagers still whispered rumors about the day Jack found him. They said the sky had darkened, as though a storm god hovered overhead, thunder crashing like divine anger at the sight of a newborn soul. In later years, after Shi Feng stumbled upon an illicit technique and, admittedly unintentionally at first, injured several people, those same villagers blamed him for reviving that ancient fury in the clouds. They claimed he was a celestial outcast born of thunder and rage, but Shi Feng never believed a word of it. He was just a boy, not some avatar of celestial wrath. No matter what tales people told, he knew who he was, and who had given him a chance at life. And as he stepped across the threshold of old Jack's compound, ready to face whatever lay ahead, Shi Feng felt something stronger than any storm rumbling in his chest: gratitude. Shi Feng finished hanging the fish on the door and was about to walk away when he paused. An important question came to mind. "Grandpa Jack, when is Master Su Yuntao arriving?" Old Jack shot him an admonishing glance. "How many times must I remind you? It's Master Su Yuntao. Got it?" He waved a gnarled hand, softening his tone. "He'll be here in 2 days. Make sure you're up early to greet him." Shi Feng paused on the doorstep, a frown creasing his brow. "Grandpa, did you actually forget? If I hadn't reminded you today, would you have waited until the day after tomorrow to tell me about the awakening ceremony?" Old Jack cleared his throat, feigning innocence. "Ah, when you get old, you start to forget things." Shi Feng rolled his eyes. "All right, then. I'll head back. I'll be there promptly for the ceremony." Go on, Old Jack urged, waving him off eagerly. The moment Shi Feng slipped out and the door shut, Old Jack bustled forward, eagerly unhooking the large fish Shi Feng had left drying on the rack. He cradled it in his arms and muttered to himself with a satisfied chuckle, "No mistake about it. Feng really is a fine lad. Sending me these hardy wild fish. Best decision I ever made." Outside, Shi Feng heard the old man's words drift on the breeze and couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. He started down the dusty village lane when a rhythmic clang, jingle, 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 stopped him in his tracks. The steady ring of hammer on anvil echoed from the smithy, and Shi Feng turned to see the village head standing just inside the open doors. There were just 3 simple adobe houses clustered side by side. On the roof of the middle one hung a weathered wooden sign, hand-painted with nothing more than a hammer. Shi Feng recognized it at once. This was Tang San's smithy. At this hour, Tang San would already be hard at work at the forge. His father, the notoriously sloppy blacksmith Tang Hao, wouldn't even stir before noon. Shi Feng was the only person in the village who knew Tang Hao's true background. Despite his laid-back reputation, Tang Hao was in fact a titled Douluo of formidable power. The moment he ascended to that rank, he had swept through the Wuhun Hall, defeating every challenger, and even driven the former pope to the brink of death. If Tang Hao were to lump Shi Feng in with the other villagers as nothing more than a nuisance and mete out hammer blows in ignorance of his strength, it would be a grave injustice. Returning home after enjoying his share of the day's fresh-caught fish, Shi Feng followed his usual routine: eat, drink, then sleep away the hours of daylight. He believed that the true practice of battle arts belonged to darkness and moonlight, not the harsh glare of the sun. It wasn't until evening that he roused himself, stretching and yawning in leisurely comfort. After a simple supper, he climbed up onto his own roof and settled in to wait for nightfall. The sky deepened into twilight, and the promise of coming shadows stirred a familiar excitement in his veins. Night was when the real work began, and Shi Feng welcomed it. Chapter 3. Can't Awaken Him. At last, the sun slipped behind the distant peaks, and a luminous moon rose to claim the night sky. Shi Feng bowed his head to the silvery orb and began his cultivation. As he moved through each flowing posture, threads of barely perceptible moonlight rained down, drawn into his body like water into parched earth. In an instant, his pupils darkened to onyx. His once short nails lengthened until they jutted beyond his fingertips by over an inch, each nail turning glossy black and tapering to a dangerously sharp point. 2 of his canine teeth also stretched unnaturally, breaching his closed lips to form small, pointed fangs that lent his handsome face a strangely endearing quality. Around him swirled a dense, pitch-black aura, an ominous qi that seemed born of the Nine Serenity Hell itself, shrouding his slight frame in an almost eerie mist. Bathed in moonlight's essence, Shi Feng felt a profound comfort cascade through him, every fiber of his being harmonizing with the night's power. His cultivation deepened, his breathing slow and measured, until at last even the moon's glow seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. Then, just as the first cockcrow split the silence of pre-dawn, Shi Feng gradually drew in his qi and brought his practice to a close. Another day had begun. Shi Feng opened his eyes just in time to see Tang San hurtling past the village gate. For the past 3 years, unless the storm raged so fiercely that even the livestock sheltered indoors, Tang San had never missed his daily regimen on that hill. What a little monster, Shi Feng muttered, though he couldn't help admiring the boy's iron will. The memory of his own lonely childhood, ostracized because of that peculiar cultivation art, brought a bitter chuckle to his lips. When he'd first regained the memories of his past life, he was already more than a year old. Instantly, a cultivation technique called Heavenly Corpse Transformation had imprinted itself on his mind. The very name sent a shiver down his spine. Even knowing he'd somehow traveled back in time, he dared not begin such a morbid practice. After all, what sensible person would choose to train in the ways of the undead? So he'd spent his 2nd year mastering the language of this realm. Only then did he piece together where he was, the Douluo continent. A world of martial souls, spirit beasts, and the tantalizing promise of ascending to godhood. A setting he recognized at once, for in his previous life, he'd been an avid reader of the Douluo novels. Now, standing on the threshold of that same world he'd once read about, Shi Feng could only watch as Tang San climbed the hill with unflagging resolve, and wonder how long it would be before he himself dared to open the door to that forbidden art. How many can resist the allure of godhood? Shi Feng certainly couldn't, yet at first he lacked the nerve to practice such a grim, otherworldly art. It wasn't until he was 3 years old, when he first climbed Clear Sky Mountain and watched Tang San's unrelenting drills, that he finally opened his eyes. Tang San, the blessed prodigy of the Douluo continent, devoted himself day after day to cultivation. But what had he truly gained? Aside from a strange technique and a handful of accolades, nothing extraordinary. Shi Feng, reborn with the memories of a 21st-century student, had devoured every cultivation novel he could find. He knew the ultimate truth. To win, you must start early. Awakening one's innate soul power as soon as possible, ideally by age 6, meant seizing victory before the race even began. Once that realization struck, he steeled himself and set out to learn the fabled Heavenly Corpse Transformation. The results were undeniable. The technique granted him astonishing might, but at a terrible cost. His flesh grew cold, his veins ran with the essence of decay, and his visage became something between man and wraith. Whispers spread through Holy Soul Village that he'd become the plague god incarnate. Even now, the corpse poison sloshing in his blood hasn't been fully mastered, and whenever it seethes to the surface, panic erupts from one end of the village to the other. Yet for Shi Feng, that danger is a price worth paying if it means awakening his soul power first and claiming his destiny as a god. Shi Feng's life had been a relentless cycle ever since he first undertook the Heavenly Corpse Transformation. The moment he stopped, even for an instant, he felt his humanity slipping away, replaced by the hollow hunger of a vampire zombie. In those early days, he'd sneaked into chicken coops and stolen drops of poultry blood just to stay alive. He could never afford a break. Only by continuously channeling the transformation could he maintain the facade of normalcy. There were times he teetered on the brink of utter despair. While his friends ventured through awe-inspiring realms and unlocked extraordinary systems, he was trapped in a corpse's shell, his future happiness dangling by a thread. But as the months passed, something unexpected happened. Cultivation itself began to soothe him. The disciplined rhythm of training, the gradual unlocking of power, these comforts outweighed any longing for ordinary pleasures. If eternal godhood lay at the end of this path, then so be it. Ordinary joys no longer held much sway over his heart. Yet now, Shi Feng found himself at a sudden impasse. Despite his tireless efforts, his inner potency had flatlined. There was no further growth. He realized with a jolt that his plight mirrored Tang San's. Without a first spirit ring to break the seal, he could not advance beyond this bottleneck. Tomorrow, the awakening ceremony would reveal his martial soul, and with it, either his salvation or his downfall. Shi Feng stared at the moonlit courtyard and braced himself. Whoever said happiness was essential had clearly never needed raw power to survive. All that mattered now was the spirit he would awaken, and whether it would carry him toward godhood or doom him to remain a mindless corpse forever. Shi Feng already possessed a fearsome martial technique. If tomorrow he could awaken a second powerful spirit, he'd start the competition miles ahead of the others. Even if he couldn't quite match Tang San, the legendary son of luck, he wouldn't be far behind. Everything now rode on what tomorrow would bring. Shi Feng watched the dawn break with barely contained excitement. Before he knew it, morning had arrived once more. As usual, Tang San had already gone up the mountain to train, and Shi Feng leapt off the roof, his heart pounding. Today promised something extraordinary. After a quick, simple breakfast, Shi Feng made his way toward the Wuhun Hall at the center of Holy Soul Village. He didn't wait for old Jack's summons. He knew the old man was out retrieving Tang San. Though called a hall, the building was nothing more than a slightly larger wooden structure. For years, Shi Feng had watched the Wuhun awakening ceremonies from afar, envy twisting in his chest. Now at last, it was his turn. In fact, this year, 9 children from Holy Soul Village would be receiving their spirit awakenings, an event worthy of record in the annals of the Douluo continent. When Shi Feng arrived, 7 children already sat inside the hall, each wearing a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation on their faces. Outside, villagers had gathered in dense clusters, their chatter rising in a wave of expectation. The adults were almost more eager than the children themselves, for these youngsters were the future hope of Holy Soul Village, and each spirit haunt they awakened could strengthen the entire community. Shi Feng took a steadying breath. Today, he would claim his own path as a spirit master. If they could awaken a true soul master capable of cultivation, Holy Soul Village would instantly earn its place in history. Shi Feng hovered at the back of the crowd, arms folded, an exasperated look on his face. "Please, let me through," he called out, his voice carrying just enough urgency to be heard. A woman in her 30s, standing at the front, pivoted on her heel. The moment she spotted a small boy almost at her heels, she let out a banshee's scream, probably the loudest she had ever produced. In one frantic motion, she leapt fully 3 meters to her side, landing in a crouch that must have felt miraculous. Shi Feng stood there, utterly speechless. Couldn't she have reacted less dramatically? He'd only asked to pass. But the woman's shriek had drawn every eye in the courtyard to them. One by one, the other townsfolk turned around, and when they saw Shi Feng's slight frame in the doorway, they all screamed too. Feet shuffling, they stampeded backward, clearing the front of the spirit hall in a matter of heartbeats. From the sudden silence, a single voice rang out. A middle-aged man, brow furrowed and arms crossed, kept his distance as he strode forward. "Shi Feng," he said, "what are you doing here?" Shi Feng beamed up at the gathering crowd. "Uncle, I'm 6 years old, too," he said brightly. "I've come to take part in the Wuhun awakening ceremony." At that, the parents exchanged wary looks. A stern woman stepped forward. "No, you can't go in," she insisted. "Our children are in there, unlocking their soul powers. You'd only cause trouble." "My son's in the chamber," another parent added, voice tight with anxiety. "I won't let anyone jeopardize his awakening." A third chimed in, frowning darkly. "What if he resorts to black magic again? He could disrupt every child's martial soul." "The fortune teller saw a titled Douluo aura around my boy," a father declared, his fists clenching. "I'll defend that future with my life. Won't let this kid ruin it." Objections rose in a chorus as several villagers formed a human barrier before the entrance. Their faces were set like stone. There would be no compromise. Even if Shi Feng stood there unarmed, they made it clear he would not pass. They'd protect their children's ceremony at all costs. Chapter 4. Su Yuntao's Disappointment. Su Yuntao had watched the entire scene outside the door with growing impatience. He'd already traveled through 2 villages without awakening a single child's practice potential, and today's mission weighed heavily on him. After Holy Soul Village, 5 more settlements waited for his judgment. Minutes slipped by, yet no child emerged. One boy still stood, blocked at the threshold. Su Yuntao's temper flared. He drew in a deep breath, channeled his soul power, and roared like a wild lion. "Release that boy and let him enter." His command, laced with surging spiritual energy, rolled across the courtyard like thunder. The villagers guarding the gate froze in their tracks, hearts pounding in terror. A stunned silence fell over everyone. Inside the wooden house, 7 children huddled together in a corner, their bodies shaking. Among them stood Shi Feng, whose sharp eyes darted between his friends and the doorway. The children exchanged fearful glances. Su Yuntao, Master Soul Forge Master of Wuhun Temple, was clearly enraged. If no one moved, what would become of them? Su Yuntao's gaze swept over the villagers who still stood rooted to the spot, refusing to make way. Annoyance flickered across his features, and he was about to snap at them again when old Jack's booming voice cut in. "What are you dawdling for? Didn't you hear Master Soul Summoner's orders? Move aside." Before anyone could answer, old Jack lunged forward, yanking Shi Feng by the arm as if scolding a wayward cub, his crutch raised threateningly. Terrified, the villagers stumbled back, clearing a path in an instant. Old Jack leaned in, voice low and fierce. "If Master Soul Summoner loses his temper, who'll rouse our children? Don't forget, Master Su Yuntao is the most powerful soul in this region." Shamed, the villagers hurriedly prostrated themselves on the dusty ground. "Lord Su Yuntao, please forgive us. We meant no disrespect." Su Yuntao's stern expression softened at their contrition. "Good. Now bring the children forward. We have little time." Still trembling, one villager managed to lift his head. "Chieftain, what about?" Old Jack shot him a fierce glare that silenced him outright. Turning to Shi Feng, he waved impatiently. "Fenger, get in there. Stay back from the others, and be ready." "Right?" Shi Feng flashed a confident grin and stepped forward, slipping past the cowed villagers and into the clearing beyond. A safe distance here meant staying at least 5 meters away from anyone, just in case his breath proved dangerous. "You all wait out here," Old Jack ordered, ushering Tang San into the Wuhun Hall. With a thunderous bang, the massive doors shut behind them, leaving the village elders to mill around in the courtyard, anxious and expectant. Old Jack bowed respectfully beside Lord Su Yuntao. "Thank you for your help today, Lord Su." Su Yuntao nodded, clearly pleased by the deference. "Very well, let's begin. Have the children line up." At his signal, 7 youngsters dashed forward. Tang San was jostled to the very back, and just behind him stood Shi Feng. For as long as anyone could remember, Tang San had carried the mind of an adult. He'd never fit in with these children. So being pushed aside was nothing new. Yet today, as he steadied himself behind Shi Feng, a spark of determination lit in his eyes. There would be no more letting himself be an outsider. Shi Feng leaned casually against the old wooden door at the very end of the line, arms folded and expression slack. Old Jack, the grizzled soul master in charge, spotted his lax posture, blew out a sigh through his beard, and fixed him with a glare that dared him to straighten up. After a few insistent blinks, Shi Feng reluctantly snapped to attention. 5 meters ahead, Tang San kept turning back, eyes darting over his shoulder as if he half expected Shi Feng to spring forward and deliver a fatal blow. Amused, Shi Feng lifted his hands to his cheeks, peeled back his lips, and revealed 2 small tiger-like fangs in a cheeky grin. Tang San quivered, spun away, and refused to look again. Just then, Su Yuntao stepped forward. A level 26 soul master and their appointed guide, he cleared his throat. "I'm Su Yuntao," he began, voice steady and reassuring. "I'll be leading you through your soul awakening. In just a moment, each of you will release and awaken your martial soul. The process can seem a bit intense, but there's nothing to fear." He offered them a gentle smile. "Now, if everyone is ready, let's begin." "Don't be afraid." After repeating himself 3 times, Su Yuntao threw up his hands in exasperation. Every time he prepared to awaken a child's martial soul, they bolted in terror, and it was slowing him down. With a resigned sigh, he unpacked his soul-awakening tools, 6 obsidian black stones and a single cobalt blue crystal ball. He arranged the stones into a perfect hexagram on the floor and gestured toward the first child. "You, step inside the circle. Close your eyes and concentrate. Do not open them until I tell you." Under the children's wide-eyed stares, Su Yuntao intoned, "Lone wolf, possess," In an instant, his figure rippled with power. His long hair whipped around him like living tendrils, his frame bulged, and his clothes strained as if they were about to tear. Shi Feng, curious despite the spectacle, leaned forward for a better look. Aside from that now familiar, unearthly handsomeness, Su Yuntao bore all the hallmarks of a werewolf, straight out of the old Western tales Shi Feng had once watched. All the other children quaked in their places, every one of them except Shi Feng and Tang San. The boy standing in the center squeezed his eyelids shut, determined not to glimpse Su Yuntao's fearsome new form. Yet even with his eyes closed, he could feel the raw power pulsing through the circle around him. Su Yuntao felt a surge of satisfaction. If he could get the first child through the awakening smoothly, the rest would scarcely be a challenge. His hands moved without pause as he reactivated the magic circle etched into the floor. In an instant, a golden aura enveloped Shi Feng, and motes of amber light drifted from the black stone into the boy's body, soothing the tremors born of sheer nervousness. "Now, extend your right hand," Su Yuntao said softly. Shi Feng did as he was told, though his fingers shook. Suddenly, a sickle materialized in his palm. Su Yuntao's lips tightened in quiet disappointment. A sickle could serve as a weapon, yes, but there was no record of a truly formidable sickle spirit master. Souls like that were more suited to farm work than to battlefield supremacy. He picked up a crystal orb and measured Shi Feng's soul power. The result wiped the last trace of hope from his expression. 0. No soul power at all. Shi Feng, it seemed, couldn't cultivate a bit. Su Yuntao's heart sank. 6 children before this one had all awakened farming tool spirits. None had shown any promise for martial use. Only one outlier remained, the little girl standing beneath Master Tang San's gaze. She had drawn a blue-silver grass, a rare and potent soul that was the envy of every soul master in training. Now, facing Shi Feng's failed awakening, Su Yuntao feared that their hopes of finding a true fighter among these youngsters might slip away entirely. Su Yuntao's lips curled in derision. "You're a useless martial spirit, completely powerless. Lan Yingqiao really is the most worthless spirit on the entire Douluo continent." The little girl before him sobbed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Su Yuntao reached out, pressed his fingers to her pulse, and confirmed it. There was no detectable soul power in her veins. One by one, the other children had stepped forward. None had sparked a true martial spirit. Finally, it was Tang San's turn. "Come on, Tang San," called out Shi Feng from the edge of the courtyard. Though young, Shi Feng's voice carried a steady confidence. Tang San took a deep breath and stepped into the engraved circle at the center of the arena. With a solemn nod, he waited for Su Yuntao's signal. The onlookers held their breath. After all the false starts, it seemed almost impossible that anyone here could succeed. Su Yuntao waved his hand, and the runes beneath Tang San began to glow. A soft golden light seeped from the circle's seams, then concentrated around Tang San's outstretched right hand. A slender, silvery blue shoot unfurled between his fingers. The delicate blades of the legendary blue-silver grass. They quivered like young leaves in a gentle breeze. At first, Su Yuntao's eyes shone with triumph. Hundreds of spirit-testing sessions had produced little more than flickers of hope, until now. But as he examined the fragile grass, his expression shifted. He had witnessed true divine spirits and formidable beast cores before. This was hardly more than a meager weed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even as the circle's golden runes blazed brighter than ever, many doubted the value of Tang San's spirit. Yet Tang San stood his ground, his gaze unwavering, ready to prove that even the humblest martial spirit could rise above its humble beginnings. Chapter 5. Such intense resentment, such a malevolent aura. The momentary spark of triumph in Su Yuntao's eyes died away. His expression froze, and with a dismissive wave he declared, "Useless martial soul." Next. Old Jack, watching from the sidelines, slumped in utter disappointment. After all his hopes for this year's awakening, nothing had panned out. Tang San, feeling a surge of frustration, blurted out, "Uncle, you haven't even tested my soul power yet." Su Yuntao glanced at him coolly. "There's no need. With that generic martial soul, you won't manifest any soul power." "Let me try anyway," Tang San insisted. At that moment, Shi Feng, who had been observing silently, stepped forward. "Master Soul Master, please give him a quick test. It won't take long." With a resigned sigh, Su Yuntao relented. He reached for the crystal ball and advanced toward Tang San, impatience etched on his features. He barely regarded the orb before raising it, and in the very next instant, the crystal ball flared with blinding light, bathing the entire hall in a brilliant, almost searing glow. Old Jack finally broke into a broad grin, but Su Yuntao's face went pale as he stared at the crystal ball pulsing with bright blue light. "Innately full of soul power?" he gasped, voice quivering. "How is that even possible?" Carefully retrieving the crystal sphere, he turned to Shi Feng with a mix of awe and regret. "Born with maximum soul power. It's astonishing," he murmured. "But it's all for naught." Disappointment clouded his eyes. If your martial soul weren't mere blue-silver grass, this could have been a landmark discovery. Shi Feng absorbed the phrase, "innately full of soul power," and pressed for more details. Perhaps out of sympathy, Su Yuntao patiently sketched the basics of soul mastery, how soul power is tested, the rarity of congenital fullness, and why such a talent usually heralds greatness. Yet he could not conceal his frustration. "A talent like this is nearly unheard of," he said with a rueful shake of his head. "To think you wasted on something so simple. Otherwise, I might have." Shi Feng merely smiled and stepped aside. He glanced at the remaining crystal balls, curiosity shining in his eyes as he prepared for the next revelation. Of all the people he had ever met, none was as inscrutable as Shi Feng. Even a year later, Tang San could still vividly recall the bone-deep chill that emanated from him. A cold so fierce that when it brushed against his skin, it nearly drained his Xuantang Kung Fu's inner energy. In his past life as a disciple of the Tang sect, Tang San had studied poisons extensively, yet he couldn't identify what toxin Shi Feng carried. It was entirely foreign, and a mere trace of it had almost overwhelmed him. For a moment, he even wondered if it might be the fabled corpse poison, but he quickly dismissed the idea. Corpse poison was associated with the undead, and Shi Feng showed none of the telltale signs of a zombie. The more Tang San thought about it, the more he respected Shi Feng's power and mystery, elevating him to the same level, perhaps even beyond, his own. Now, a single question occupied Tang San's mind. What martial spirit would Shi Feng awaken? Would it, like his own, appear useless at first sight? Shi Feng stepped into the awakening circle before Su Yuntao could even give the order. Noticing his resolve, the impatient instructor straightened. This was his duty, to guide each child through their awakening. "Close your eyes and center yourself," Su Yuntao instructed. Shi Feng complied, shutting his eyes and drawing his focus inward. With a swift, practiced gesture, Su Yuntao activated the runic seal. Instantly, torrents of golden motes burst forth, swirling so densely they threatened to obscure the circle's carved edges. Su Yuntao's breath caught. His irises glowed faintly green. He had never witnessed such an outpouring of energy at an awakening. These sparks multiplied faster than Shi Feng could draw them in, and in mere seconds the entire wooden chamber was bathed in a blinding golden light. Despite the glare, no one dared look away. The assembled children and attendants clenched their fists against the brilliance, their eyes locked on Shi Feng in the center. Old Jack and Su Yuntao exchanged an excited glance, their expressions shining with anticipation. They both knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. A tense hush fell over the vast chamber of the Wuhan Temple in Nodding City. In the center, Shi Feng stood perfectly still, eyes closed, hands pressed gently over his chest as he tapped into the deep well of his spirit energy. Around him, deacons and disciples watched in rapt silence, waiting for his martial spirit to awaken. "Keep going. Trust what you feel in your heart." Su Yuntao's voice rang out, edged with equal parts encouragement and impatience. Motes of golden light began to swirl around Shi Feng, each one brighter and more numerous than the last. Moments stretched into minutes, far beyond the usual awakening time for any neophyte, but still no form took shape on Shi Feng's body. Su Yuntao's excitement wavered on the brink of anxiety. In all his years as a deacon at the temple, overseeing hundreds of ritual awakenings, he had never witnessed anything like this. Even the most extraordinary cases recorded in the Spirit Hall's archives offered no precedent for what was unfolding before him. Could it be? Su Yuntao's pulse quickened. Was it possible that Shi Feng was on the verge of calling forth a completely new and supremely powerful martial spirit, one the world had never seen? If so, the implications for the Wuhun temple would be staggering. A disciple wielding an unprecedented spirit would elevate the temple's prestige and his own standing with astonishing speed. A long-awaited promotion, a generous salary increase, even the favor of Madame Bai Fume. All could be within his grasp. Every eye in the hall fixed on Shi Feng as the swirling lights thickened, edging closer to his form. The air crackled with unspoken promise. Su Yuntao swallowed hard, barely daring to breathe. Soon, the true nature of Shi Feng's spirit would be revealed, and with it, the destiny of everyone present. Shi Feng's anxiety deepened as precious time slipped by without any sign of his martial soul awakening. Suddenly, with a shetch, arp click click, the 6 obsidian energy stones arrayed before him fractured. A torrent of golden light burst forth, surging directly into Shi Feng's body. Almost at once, something stirred within him. A vast, inky mist billowed out from behind his shoulders, its darkness so dense it seemed to swallow the light around it. The air grew frigid and oppressive, and an undercurrent of malevolence pulsed through the haze, sending an involuntary shiver down every spine in the room. Su Yuntao's eyes went wide with alarm. His heart pounded furiously as a deadly fear gripped him. Never had he encountered a spirit so fierce that it could unsettle a level 26 Grand Soul Master on the verge of birth. "Everyone, get back!" he roared, his voice cracking like thunder. Startled by the terrifying aura emanating from Shi Feng, the children, along with old Jack, didn't hesitate. Their legs wobbled, and they bolted for the exit as if their lives depended on it. Only Tang San remained, rooted to the spot. He watched Shi Feng's back with an unreadable expression, his gaze steady and intense as the swirling black mist continued to throb with uncanny power. A frigid breath swept through the room, so cold and suffused with a cruel, domineering poison that Tang San's head throbbed with the effort of keeping conscious. In that instant, he understood the truth. Shi Feng's venom wasn't some ordinary toxin, but an extension of his martial soul. Tang San stared at the door, torn between obeying old Jack's summons and uncovering the secret behind that overbearing poison. "Little San, hurry up and come out." Old Jack's voice sounded impatient from beyond the door. Tang San hesitated, unwilling to leave his vantage point. If only he could glimpse Shi Feng's martial soul, perhaps he could decipher the origin of that lethal aura. But even as he willed himself to stay hidden, the air behind Shi Feng gyrated with fresh intensity. The inky mist coalesced, churning into a shadowy shape that towered and stretched with uncanny fluidity. Through the folds of darkness, a humanoid form took shape. Dressed in strange, archaic robes, its face shrouded in thick black vapor. Then, as if responding to some silent command, the mist in front of the figure's face thinned. 2 glowing, blood-red eyes blinked fiercely, and a pair of jagged fangs slid into view. Tang San's heart thundered in his chest. When the last wisp of mist fell away, the horror was undeniable. Before him stood a zombie, its skin the color of storm-tossed seas and its mouth lined with ragged teeth. The creature's eerie gaze locked onto Tang San, and a low, menacing growl reverberated through the gloom. Chapter 6. Heaven and Earth Clash? The blue-skinned, fang-toothed zombie threw back its head and unleashed a silent scream. In that instant, a wave of suffocating pressure rolled outward, causing everyone's hearts to pound in terror. Tang San didn't wait to see what happened next. He turned and fled. Only Su Yuntao remained, paralyzed with shock. Even as a great soul master, he felt the oppressive weight of this unknown martial soul pressing down on his chest like a boulder. At that same moment, in a modest cottage on the village's fringe, Tang Hao, who had been studying ancient scrolls, suddenly snapped to his feet. He looked sharply toward the village center, his cloudy eyes alight with a fierce, uncanny glow. Such potent resentment, such vile aura, what power is this? His words barely faded when Tang Hao vanished from the room in a blink. Moments later, he reappeared outside the Wuan Hall, standing silently behind the onlookers. His gaze locked onto Shi Feng, who stood alone in the hall's dim interior. The air between them crackled with tension, as if heaven and earth themselves were bracing for a clash. Shi Feng stood frozen at the center of the hexagram formation, disbelief churning in his chest. His martial soul, his Wuhun, had become a zombie. 1,000 questions hammered at his mind. Had it warped because of his experiments with the celestial corpse transformation technique? Or did the martial soul itself carry some hidden power that enabled him to manipulate the dead? There was no time to untangle the riddle. At least the inky black mist coiling around the zombie martial soul hadn't spilled beyond the sigils on the ground. Had it escaped, Saint Soul Village would have been engulfed in that virulent corpse poison, and only a handful of cultivators could withstand its lethal taint. Ordinary villagers would have fallen in minutes. Desperately, Shi Feng reached out with his spirit, intent on reclaiming control, but it was useless. The zombified martial soul thrashed and strained against his will, lifting its head toward the sky in a silent, anguished roar. Though no sound emerged, Shi Feng felt its boundless hatred and regret pierce his mind like a blade. The villagers gathered at the gate stared at Shi Feng in horror, whispering among themselves, "A wicked spirit, what a disaster he must be." Suddenly, a deafening roar split the clear sky. In an instant, daylight vanished beneath a mass of leaden clouds, heaving as if about to crush the earth. Bolts of lightning, purple, black, red, even gold, snaked through the tumultuous gloom, and thunderclaps rattled like cannon fire. "Everyone, fall back!" A powerful voice boomed across the courtyard, drowning out the thunder for a heartbeat. Tang San looked up, frowning. The voice was eerily familiar, yet he couldn't place it. Nearby, old Jack sprang into action, urgently herding the villagers to safety. Every few steps, he glanced back at the spirit hall, his brow creased with worry for Shi Feng, who still stood motionless inside. The storm cloud pressed ever lower, its twisted lightning growing more ferocious. None of them had ever witnessed anything like it. But among all the onlookers, it was Tang Hao who felt the dread most keenly, an instinctive chill that told him this was only the beginning of something far more terrifying. The ordinary villagers all felt an overwhelming, invisible weight bearing down on them, but Su Yuntao sensed something far deadlier. In his gut, he knew that if those brutal thunderbolts struck, the child standing there unmoving would be reduced to ashes. Yet the lightning spared him and smashed the ground where the boy had been. Panic-stricken, Su Yuntao bolted from the house, splashing through puddles as he stumbled toward the gathered villagers of Shengun village. His face was ashen, horror shone in his eyes. "Lord Su Yuntao, what's happening?" Old Jack's voice trembled as he stepped forward. Su Yuntao could only shake his head, unable to speak. Inside that room, beneath the roar of the storm, he'd come closer to collapse than ever before. His knees had nearly buckled, he'd broken into a sweat from the sheer terror of it, and then he'd fled, every instinct screaming that he was running for his life. "Master Su Yuntao, you're the strongest. You have to save Shi Feng!" Old Jack shouted desperately. "Quiet!" Su Yuntao barked, his voice eerily sharp. He pressed a hand to his temple, fighting the tremor in his limbs. Entering again would be suicide. He'd already been on the brink. He refused to go back. All around them, the other villagers huddled, whispering and shivering as the storm raged on. No one dared speak above a murmur. The dread in their hearts was too great. Even from a distance, they could feel the power that had almost consumed them, and the boy who stood at its center. He must be a man forsaken by heaven. Now the heavens themselves punish him. Awakening a martial soul invites the wrath of the skies. I pray it won't lay waste to our holy soul village. Even if he survives, we cannot allow him to remain here. He'll slaughter us all eventually. Shi Feng froze. The world around him had been swallowed by darkness as if night had fallen prematurely over the village. Ominous clouds churned overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. Each thunderclap pounded like a war drum, rattling his bones and nearly bursting his eardrums. He felt bound by the storm itself, powerless to move. He had only just awakened his martial soul. Why would that summon such cataclysmic fury? It was as if the will of heaven had manifested in thunder, intent on erasing him from existence. Even a zombie martial soul, fearsome as it was, should not command nature to bend so unbearably. A chill ran down his spine as another force stirred behind him, emanating from the zombie martial soul he bore. This energy was the very opposite of the corpse poison that seeped through its veins. Wild, violent currents of power pulsed outward, and that oppressive aura made Shi Feng's soul tremble with dread. Shi Feng felt a surge of power so intense it resembled the very breath of a storm. No sooner had he registered the thought than the sky's thunder and lightning coalesced into a single, multicolored bolt. It plunged toward the wooden house below, spiraling through a vortex of inky black clouds. A chorus of terrified screams cut through the air as villagers collapsed in panic. Tang Hao planted his feet beside Tang San, his expression as hard as iron, soul power humming at his fingertips, ready to spirit Tang San away at a moment's notice. Just as the prismatic lightning struck the roof, a thick, golden bolt erupted from within the house and shot upward to meet it. Boom! The two arcs of power collided overhead in a deafening blast, sounding as though the heavens themselves were cracking open. The point of impact blossomed into a radiant sphere, glowing like a miniature sun and bathing the darkened world in blinding daylight. An oppressive weight settled over everyone's hearts. Su Yuntao yearned to flee, but his legs trembled under that sky-born might. He couldn't muster the strength to resist. Before them hovered a tiny sun of twin thunderbolts, radiating a terrifying aura. Tang Hao knew better than to approach. A single breath too close, and he'd be reduced to slag. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the sun collapsed. Rainbow-hued arcs of lightning recoiled, vanishing into the leaden cloud overhead. The golden bolt dove back into the wooden house, sank into the dormant zombie marshal's soul, and disappeared without a trace. Every witness, except Tang Hao, his son, and Su Yuntao, lay paralyzed on the ground. Above, the roiling black clouds dissolved in an instant, fading away as though they'd never existed. Everyone blinked in disbelief, lingering fear still gnawing at their hearts even as relief slowly set in after the catastrophe. "Xiaochen!" old Jack cried, rushing forward with quivering steps. Though he'd always found Shi Feng a bit intimidating, the boy had become like a grandson to him. How could he not be worried? "Let's go take a look," Tang Hao said, resting a broad palm on Tang San's shoulder. Together they strode toward the wooden house. Su Yuntao hesitated, his expression conflicted as he weighed the risks. But the threat seemed to have passed, and his only means of livelihood lay inside, so he clenched his teeth and followed. The other villagers hung back, too terrified to approach. They watched from a safe distance, horror still etched on their faces. Inside the room, Shi Feng's martial spirit had completely vanished, and he had regained control of his body. His shirt was plastered to his back with sweat. The ordeal had been harrowing. He could still feel the echo of standing at the very gates of hell. Chapter 7. Would you join the Wuhun Hall? The 6 black stones at Shi Feng's feet crumbled to fine dust, and Su Yuntao couldn't hide his dismay. He fumbled for his notebook, flipping to a fresh page with a scowl. "Young man," he said, voice tight with frustration, "what kind of martial spirit do you possess?" Shi Feng met his gaze calmly. After a moment's silence, he unhesitatingly answered, "My martial soul is called the Zombie." At first, Su Yuntao's face fell. His enchanted tools were shattered, and now this bizarre revelation. But then his eyes brightened. A zombie martial soul, something entirely new, never catalogued in any record. He leaned forward, excitement edging out his earlier disappointment. "You're sure you can control it safely?" Shi Feng inclined his head. "Absolutely. Ever since I reclaimed my body from the martial soul's grasp, I've gathered its latent memories and mastered its power. Even the deadly corpse poison it exudes is now under my precise command. No more stray toxin leaks." Su Yuntao's pen hovered over the page as if reluctant to make a mark. This was unprecedented. Then, unable to contain his eagerness, he snapped the notebook shut. "All right then, let's see it." He stepped back and cleared his throat. "Release your martial soul for me." In that instant, Su Yuntao forgot the sting of his damaged tools. A thrill rippled through him as he anticipated the first glimpse of a zombie spirit in action. Surely this discovery would shake the foundations of the Wuhun Hall itself. This was a completely unprecedented martial soul, one awakened by Shi Feng himself. Whoever reported his unique zombie spirit to the Martial Soul Hall would earn generous rewards, and the hall's leaders would forever remember and perhaps even enshrine the name of its discoverer. Shi Feng gave a quiet nod and focused his will. This time, no swirling black mist obscured his spirit. Instead, a humanoid figure emerged in full view. Its skeleton was impossibly tall, draped in tattered ancient robes. Though it bore no flesh, its bones radiated raw power. Jet-black talons, razor-sharp as daggers, protruded from its fingertips, and a chilling, Inky aura clung to every hollow limb. The creature's gaunt face featured sunken cheeks and two gleaming fangs, lending it a nightmarish otherworldly presence. Su Yuntao, Tang San, Tang Hao, and Old Jack stared in stunned disbelief. A humanoid martial spirit like this was something none of them had ever encountered. As the hall fell silent, everyone realized they were witnessing the birth of a legend. Su Yuntao and Tang Hao exchanged impressed glances. They'd both heard of Numenon martial souls, spirits formed from a specific part or organ of the body, but those were always fragmentary manifestations. This hulking zombie spirit before them, however, wore a fully human form. Could it be an enhanced type of body spirit? Rumor had it that body-based martial souls were among the most formidable. If that was true, how powerful would Shi Feng's spirit turn out to be? "Martial spirit possession!" Shi Feng shouted. In an instant, the burly zombie standing behind him dissolved into a dark torrent of energy and flowed into his body. His transformation mirrored the last time he'd called upon this spirit. Fangs lengthened into sharp points, his pupils deepened into obsidian pools, and his fingernails contorted into lethal claws. Shi Feng exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. At least he kept his own build. Instead of turning gaunt like the original zombie spirit, he remained sturdy and strong. Su Yuntao snapped open a small notebook and poised her pen. "All right, Shi Feng, tell us, what is your martial soul's ability?" Shi Feng clenched his fists, exhilaration surging through his body. "Now that my martial soul has fully merged," he said, voice trembling with excitement, "my strength, speed, and defenses have all soared, and this soul power is tinged with an extraordinarily potent toxin." Originally, his aura had carried a deadly poison, but once the martial soul took hold, its toxicity grew even more fearsome. A single poisonous flare could fell a full-grown buffalo in an instant. Scrambling to record every detail, Su Yuntao's pen flew across her notes. "Incredible," she murmured. "You've awakened a truly formidable martial soul. Next, we'll assess your innate soul power." She offered him a crystalline orb, her eyes alight with anticipation. Though she'd never witnessed a martial soul this strong before, her studies at the Wuhun Temple had impressed upon her one fundamental truth. The more powerful the martial soul, the higher its soul power. Even a blue lightning Tyrannosaurus soul, unless mutated, rarely achieves more than 1 or 2 levels of soul power. Shi Feng felt his heart pound in agreement, matching Su Yuntao's excitement as he prepared for the next test. Shi Feng pressed his palm against the smooth surface of the crystal orb. Instantly, an irresistible force tugged at his soul energy, siphoning it from every fiber of his being into the heart of the gem. It was just like what had happened to Tang San. As the orb absorbed the surging power, it erupted in a blinding azure light, bathing the entire chamber in shimmering blue. "Ha-ha! Yes, to be brimming with soul power again." Su Yuntao threw back his head, laughter rolling from his lips like thunder. His eyes sparkled with triumph. After so many setbacks, he believed he'd finally reached the summit of his ambitions. "My young friend," Su Yuntao purred, his tone deceptively gentle, "why not pledge yourself to the mighty spirit hall?" Shi Feng had anticipated this very offer. He met Su Yuntao's gaze with a steady smile. "Master Su Yuntao, I'm honored by your invitation, but my path lies elsewhere. I intend to enroll at the Nodding Soul Master Academy." He paused, letting his words sink in. Despite his extraordinary talent, he refused to court the same ill fate that had befallen so many prodigies, Tang San included. Too often, brilliance had been snuffed out before it could fully burn, and Shi Feng was determined not to become another tragic footnote. If Shi Feng truly wanted to ascend to godhood, there was no surer path than to side with Tang San, the celestial plane's heir. In just over a decade, he could secure a divine appointment. Only a fool would pass up such an easy route. Su Yuntao pressed forward, his tone urgent. "Think it over again. You know the Spirit Hall is the most powerful soul master organization on the Douluo continent. Join us, and you'll receive the finest training available. With your raw soul power talent, there's every chance you'll become a titled Douluo." He had never been more eager to recruit someone. If Shi Feng signed on, Su Yuntao's own standing would skyrocket. Promotion, a bigger stipend, even the admiration of someone like Cece. Excitement lit his eyes as he strode up to Shi Feng, slapped him smartly on the head, and snapped. "You blockhead! Are you out of your mind? What could be better than joining the Spirit Hall? After a few decades, you'll rise to become a titled Douluo, and our Holy Soul Village could proudly be called the titled Douluo Village. Old Jack tugged at his whiskers, his eyes blazing with fervor. Shi Feng froze. In all his 6 years, he had never seen Old Jack look quite so intense. Su Yuntao stepped forward with an encouraging smile. A titled Douluo is the ultimate powerhouse in our world, he said, his gaze never leaving the boys. I don't believe any child could turn down an offer like that. When Shi Feng remained silent, Su Yuntao pressed on. But if you swear allegiance to the Spirit Hall today, we can secure your very first soul ring by tomorrow. At that point, you'll officially be a soul master. For a 6-year-old, the promise of immediate power, a soul master's authority, was every bit as irresistible as the distant dream of becoming a titled Douluo. Unlike that far-off title, a soul ring could be theirs before the sun set. Who could blame any child for feeling tempted? Shi Feng shook his head stubbornly. I'm sorry, but I still don't want to join the Spirit Hall right now. Su Yuntao's face fell. It looked as though coaxing Shi Feng was a lost cause. He glanced at Village Chief Jack, his mind racing. If I can't persuade Shi Feng, maybe I can deal with Jack. With a forced smile, he turned back to Shi Feng. Very well, go on home. Chief Jack, stay here for a moment. I'll give you the martial soul certificates for those 2 children. Old Jack shot Shi Feng a dark look, but then bowed to Su Yuntao with exaggerated courtesy. Thank you for your help, Lord Su. Chapter 8. Don't Hurt My Dad. Finally free, Shi Feng dashed outside, eager to return home and study his newly awakened zombie spirit. Unnoticed until now, Tang Hao and his young son, Tang San, had been standing by the gate. As soon as Shi Feng emerged, they hurried to follow him. Hey kid, wait up! Tang Hao called out, gripping Tang San's hand. Shi Feng paused and turned, wary. To his surprise, it was Tang Hao who stood there, smiling politely, but with an intense gleam in his eye. Shi Feng had only ever observed Tang Hao from a distance, but today he stood face to face with the notorious titled Douluo. Tang Hao looked every bit the part of a down-and-out blacksmith, his hair matted into a tangled mess as if it hadn't been washed in months, his broad frame clad in a threadbare tunic, patched so many times its original color was long gone. He was the only blacksmith for miles, yet somehow his earnings vanished almost as soon as he got them, always spent on one bottle of wine after another. Uncle Tang, Shi Feng called out, stepping into the smithy's dusty doorway. No longer fearful, now that he could freely wield the corpse energy within him, he waited for the older man's reaction. Tang Hao wiped sweat and soot from his brow, revealing the faintest hint of a grin. You sent my little son a fish the day before yesterday, he rumbled, voice rough but warm. That was kind of you. Why don't you come over to my place today? You're about the same age as my boy, so you 2 can get to know each other. Shi Feng nodded. All right, Uncle Tang. I'd bluff like that. Off to the side, Tang San stared in astonishment. He had never seen his father smile like this, and of all people to inspire it, he never expected it would be that irritating, but undeniably generous, Shi Feng. Immediately, Tang San stared at Shi Feng as though he were a monster, yet deep inside, he felt grateful. For years his father, Tang Hao, had numbed himself with drink, trudging through life in a fog. Now, because of Shi Feng, a genuine smile lit his face, and that was nothing short of a miracle. When Shi Feng nodded in agreement, Tang Hao's grin softened further. He reached out, clearly intent on taking Shi Feng's hand, only to have Tang San spring forward. Tang San seized his father's wrist with both hands, braced his legs, and even channeled his jackhammer technique to pin Tang Hao in place, refusing to let him move a step closer. Father, don't go near him. He's dangerous, Tang San shouted, panic flaring in his chest. Just moments ago, he himself had almost fallen victim to Shi Feng's corpse poison, and the thought of his father being corrupted by it sent a chill through him. Besides, during Shi Feng's awakening, the black mist unleashed by his zombie martial soul had carried a poison far more potent than anything Shi Feng had used before. In Tang San's mind, the threat level had just shot through the roof. Tang Hao looked down in surprise. He knew his son was strong for a 6-year-old, but he hadn't expected him to be this powerful. With barely any effort, he gripped Tang San's arm and lifted him clear off the ground, even as the boy struggled desperately. Dangerous? My son? Tang Hao said with an amused smile. Not a chance. Dangling in midair, Tang San stared at his father in disbelief. He just tapped into his soul power, boosting his weight by the hundreds of caddies, yet he was still hoisted up as if he were featherlight. Defeated, he let go and landed with a thud. Father, you don't understand, he said, brushing himself off. Shi Feng, the one they call the plague god, can poison anyone who gets close. Before Tang San could say more, Shi Feng appeared at his side. His eyes, as dark and sparkly as polished onyx, took in the scene, and he reached out to grab Tang San's shoulders. The boy froze, trembling like a chick caught in the rain. Uncle, let's go, Shi Feng said cheerfully, draping an arm around Tang San. Tang Hao chuckled, nodded, and led the way down the path as father and sons headed off together. Let's go, San. Shi Feng leaned close to Tang San's ear, his voice barely a whisper as his tongue flicked out, wetting his lips. Tang San froze, eyes locking on the two small canines that peeked from Shi Feng's grin. He couldn't shake the memory of Shi Feng's martial spirit transformation moments before. Hair standing on end, aura crackling with barely contained power. A cold shiver ran down Tang San's spine. What if Shi Feng really sank those teeth into his neck, pierced a vein, and drank his blood? On the Douluo continent, no one had ever encountered a zombie, creatures of legend said to feast on human blood. Shi Feng, however, knew exactly what he faced. As the shambling corpse lurched forward, Tang San gathered every ounce of spirit power he had. With a sudden wrench, he tore himself free from Shi Feng's hold, spun around, and sprinted straight into his father Tang Hao's embrace. Shi Feng watched, momentarily nonplussed. Tang San's overreaction struck him as almost comical. Yet when he saw the boy pressing against his father, a strange, tantalizing aroma drifted through the night air, warm and meaty, like roast chicken. Shi Feng's mouth went dry. He'd never tasted human blood, but in that instant, a fierce, forbidden craving flickered within him. He clenched his jaw and forced the urge down, shaking his head as he hurried to catch up with Tang San and his father. He still didn't understand why Tang Hao had summoned him so urgently. The invitation felt oddly out of place. Was the elder impressed by his unmatched talent, hoping to forge a bond between their families? As the trio moved past a cluster of villagers drawn by the commotion, the frightened onlookers scattered in terror, their faces pale in the moonlight. The villagers used to dare to come within 5 meters of Shi Feng. Now they wouldn't set foot within 50. In hushed tones they muttered, "That Tang Hao is really something. Doesn't he worry about getting himself killed? Yeah, I doubt we'll ever ask him to forge our farm tools again. I've already warned my children to steer clear of Tang San." Tang Hao led his son and Shi Feng homeward. Tang San kept peeking anxiously over his father's shoulder, afraid that Shi Feng might snap and hurt Tang Hao. In his mind, Tang San reviewed everything he knew about the corpse poison swirling inside him. Though he'd never faced it in his previous life, he'd studied it thoroughly in the 100 Poisons manual. At the junior level, the toxin's effects were mild, and glutinous rice could neutralize it. Thank heavens I still have some at home, he thought with relief. When they reached Tang San's modest cottage, Tang Hao swept his arm in welcome. "Xiao Feng, feel free to sit wherever you like. Make yourself at home." Shi Feng returned the smile and chose a seat. As he settled in, he could already smell the faint sweetness of glutinous rice cooking in the next room, and, for the first time since arriving, he felt a sting of genuine welcome. Tang Hao suddenly realized he'd invited Shi Feng over but had nothing to serve his guest. Clearing his throat, he called out, "Xiao San, come here." Tang San hurried in, curiosity written all over his face. "Father, what is it?" Leaning close, Tang Hao cupped a hand to his mouth and whispered, "You know how to catch fish, don't you?" Tang San blinked. He'd never fished a day in his life, but with his hidden weapon training, wrangling a couple of river fish ought to be easy. He nodded. "Ahem, we have a guest, after all," Tang Hao said, his cheeks reddening. "Go catch 2 fish and bring them back. I want to cook them for Shi Feng." Only then did Tang San understand. He stared at his father in surprise. His normally stoic dad seemed altogether different today. Nervous, excited, almost proud. Tang San felt a warm flutter in his chest. After all Shi Feng had done for their family, maybe this was the least he could do. Maybe he even ought to thank Shi Feng himself. Chapter 9. Uncle teaches you how to forge iron. After stepping out of the back room, Tang San leaned close to Shi Feng and whispered, "Don't hurt my father, all right?" Shi Feng nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Relax. I'm not that kind of person." Tang San shot him a doubtful look, then turned and hurried off. Once he was out of sight, Shi Feng shook his head and muttered under his breath, "Your father's supposed to be some hidden big shot. Why would I dare cross him? That'd be suicide." Tang San wasted no time. Before long, he returned with 2 wriggling fish dangling from a makeshift line. Shi Feng raised an eyebrow, so that's where the kid had disappeared to. As Tang San laid the fish on the table, Shi Feng noticed 2 small, neat holes piercing their skulls, as if they'd been shot by tiny projectiles. "Huh," he murmured. "Hidden weapons?" He moved closer, just as Tang San, sweating from the effort, began awkwardly hacking at one fish with a kitchen knife. The boy's grip was as clumsy as a hoof. Unable to hold back, Shi Feng let out a low laugh. Tang San froze, cheeks reddening as he glared at Shi Feng. "What's so funny?" Shi Feng held up a hand. "Nothing, just never seen anyone slice a fish quite like that." Tang San bristled, but didn't respond. Shi Feng crossed his arms and studied the makeshift workspace. "All right, let's get to work. I promised your father I'd show you some proper iron forging techniques, didn't I?" Tang San shot him another wary look, then cleared his throat. "Yes, uncle." Shi Feng nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Good. First lesson, respect your tools. And that means learning how to hold a blade before you even think about swinging it." "Let me do it." Shi Feng grabbed the kitchen knife from Tang San's hand and with swift precision scraped off the fish scales, slit open the belly, removed its innards and gills, then rinsed it until it gleamed. Tang San stood frozen, eyes wide in shock as Shi Feng finished the job in mere minutes. "You must be stunned," Shi Feng said, a triumphant smile tugging at his lips. Tang San managed a shaky nod, then shook his head and sneered inwardly. "What's so great about that?" "All right," Shi Feng went on, "while I catch the next one, go fetch the rest of what we need. Onions, ginger, garlic, chilies, cooking wine, and soy sauce." Tang San blinked. "That's a lot of things. Why can't we just boil and eat the fish?" Shi Feng rolled his eyes. "Do you want a meal you'd be proud to eat, or something even a starving dog could choke down? Chop chop. Get moving." With a huff, Tang San stomped off to gather the seasonings. Shi Feng, meanwhile, deftly hooked another wriggling fish. Off to the side, Tang Hao leaned against the wall, grinning as he watched the 2 younger boys scurry about, each determined to prove a point. Honestly, Shi Feng didn't know the first thing about cooking. If he did, he'd have tackled it himself from the start. As Tang San laid out the last of the ingredients across the counter, he shot Shi Feng a suspicious look. "Are you sure you can handle this?" Shi Feng only shook his head and offered a small, confident smile. Half an hour later, Tang San tore off a generous piece of fish. The heady aroma of spices and the tingle of chili danced on his palate, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "This is incredible!" Tang Hao's eyes lit up too. He turned to Shi Feng, genuinely surprised. "You've got to come by more often, Feng. Uncle will teach you some tricks with ironworking." Ironworking. Shi Feng mused silently, guessing Tang Hao was really after a taste of his cooking talent. He didn't mind the visits, though. Cultivating goodwill now would only help once he started sharing Tang San's good fortune down the road. Just then, old Jack's voice called from the hallway. "Shi Feng, you in there?" Shi Feng straightened, hurried to the door, and waved as old Jack ambled toward the kitchen. Here's a smooth, idiomatic revision of the chapter, with Zhang Chen renamed Shi Feng and clarified as male. "Here you are, Grandpa." Old Jack pushed open the yard gate and trudged in, grumbling, "Boy, why'd you make me come all this way?" But the moment he crossed the threshold, he sniffed the air. His old eyes brightened at the scent of cooking. Shi Feng swung the door wide. "I've been up since dawn," Shi Feng said with a grin. "I'm starving." Before anyone could offer, old Jack grabbed a bowl, heaped rice into it, and plopped down at the table. Shi Feng followed suit. The old man wasted no time tearing into a thick slice of braised pork, murmuring praise between bites. Then he noticed Tang San and her little son lingering awkwardly by the door. "This fish turned out pretty well, too," he called, nodding toward the side dish. "Come on, help yourselves." Tang San and her boy exchanged surprised glances, but shuffled forward. As plates clattered and chopsticks clicked, Old Jack's expression softened as he looked back at Shi Feng. Too bad you've been ill, boy. Shi Feng paused, set down his chopsticks, and met his grandfather's worried gaze. Grandpa, everything that happened before was because my martial soul had awakened, but wasn't under my control. Now that it's fully manifested, I can manage its power. I promise you I won't bring harm to anyone again. Old Jack nodded slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders for the first time that morning. This version preserves all plot points: Grandpa's good-natured scolding, the warm family meal with Tang San and her son, and Shi Feng's explanation about his martial soul, while presenting them in clear, natural English. So you don't have to worry about dinner anymore, Old Jack announced with a broad grin. You should have said that sooner, boy. I thought you were only moving back tomorrow. No, make that tonight. From now on, you're in charge of the cooking. Tang Hao's eyes gleamed with envy, but Old Jack shot him a steely look. Shi Feng's my responsibility now, so don't get any ideas. Flushing, Tang Hao opened his mouth but found no words. Old Jack leaned back, chuckling. You're a sly one, Tang Hao. The moment you heard Shi Feng had awakened a powerful martial spirit, you practically dragged him into your home. What's the plan? Trying to cozy up to a future title Douluo? Shi Feng felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down his spine. Title Douluo, ranked among the strongest fighters in existence, was Old Jack really daring to jest about one? Tang Hao, clearly caught off guard, sank into an embarrassed silence as Old Jack rocked in his chair, still chuckling at the awkward scene. Shi Feng quickly jumped in to smooth things over. Grandpa, it was my idea to come over and play at Tang San's. Old Jack hesitated for a moment, then broke into a broad smile. Of course, you and Saner are the future of our village. We want you both to be happy. He glanced approvingly at Shi Feng, then grew serious. You know, Fenger, you might consider joining the Wuhun Palace. It's one of the top Soulmaster academies. Before Old Jack could extol its virtues, Shi Feng cut in with a forced grin. Uncle Tang, Grandpa Saner, thanks for the meal. I'm all set. He rose from the table. I'll let you finish eating. Almost before anyone could reply, he darted out the door. From down the lane, his voice floated back. Grandpa, I'm heading home now to pack. I'll move in with you tonight. Inside the dining room, the adults exchanged puzzled looks. Shi Feng had always been quick on his feet, especially when Old Jack's endless chatter threatened to start. They suspected Su Yuntao had been whispering in Jack's ear again, stirring him up about Feng's future. Old Jack merely picked up his chopsticks and turned to Tang Hao, who was still seated. Hauer, I've decided that Saner should enroll in the Notting City Junior Soul Master Academy. It's the best place for him to hone his talents. Tang San's face lit up at the suggestion, eyes shining with excitement. But Tang Hao's answer was immediate and firm. No. Old Jack's face was flushed with anger as he slammed his fist on the table. Do you have any idea what becoming a Soul Master would mean for Feng? He barked, glaring at Shi Feng. This isn't just an ordinary title. It's a whole lifetime of responsibility and honor. A heated argument erupted in the Tang household. Harsh words flew back and forth until, in a final huff, Old Jack turned on his heel and stormed out. Shi Feng stood frozen, his heart pounding. He looked to his father, Master Tang Hao, who watched Jack's retreating back in silence. Shi Feng felt frustration burn within him, tinged with confusion. He understood neither his father's sudden coldness toward Jack, nor what had passed between them. But despite the questions swirling in his mind, he swallowed his pride. He refused to add more worry to his father's burden. After Jack's footsteps faded into the distance, Master Tang's stern features relaxed. He stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on Shi Feng's shoulder. Feng, he said softly, show me your martial soul. Shi Feng's heart leapt. The very next moment, he was bounding down the winding path toward home, eager to explore the power he'd only just unlocked. Now that he had a few uninterrupted hours, he could study his martial soul without distraction. The sensation of awakening its power had been intoxicating, like a child unwrapping a long-desired toy, marveling at every detail, unwilling to put it down. All afternoon, Shi Feng devoted himself to practice. He coaxed energy from the earth, shaping it at will into spectral limbs that writhed like restless corpses, proof that his martial soul was indeed the dreaded zombie type, famed for both its ferocity and resilience. Every time he summoned those phantom arms, his chest swelled with pride. He'd imagined himself already strong enough to shake the heavens. Yet as twilight fell, reality tempered his exuberance. Despite the raw potential of his martial soul, he lacked the mastery to push it beyond its natural limits. His spectral arms were powerful, but erratic. His control still wavered. Shi Feng realized that true mastery would demand far more time, training, and sheer determination than he'd first believed. He breathed deeply, steeling himself for the long road ahead. Awakening his martial soul had been only the beginning. Unless he proved his worth in both spirit and strength, he would never claim the title of Soul Master, and he knew he had far to go before he could even dream of challenging the skies. Since the moment his Wuhun awakened, Shi Feng had felt a constant restlessness gnawing at him. His right eyelid twitched without pause, and a crushing weight pressed on his chest as if a mountain had settled there. He recognized the sensation all too well. It was the same oppressive force he'd experienced when heavenly thunder struck him at the moment of his martial soul's birth. "Damn," he muttered. "Last time the gods near lie killed me. Do they really want to try again?" Anger flared in Shi Feng's veins. Why was some higher power targeting him so relentlessly? He was still just a kid. Besides, his demonic martial soul felt far weaker now than it had at its peak awakening. Could it even withstand another bolt of divine lightning? His thoughts turned suddenly to Tang Hao, the strongest cultivator in Holy Soul Village. If anyone could help him weather this storm, it was Tang Hao. It seemed Shi Feng still needed to forge a strong bond with Tang Hao. If another thunderstorm struck, Tang Hao's house would be his only refuge. Chapter 10. A Knot in My Stomach? Evening settled in as Shi Feng made his way back to old Jack's sprawling compound. That night's feast was nothing short of extravagant, and Jack beamed with pride as he watched Shi Feng tuck in. When the plates were cleared, the old man produced a weathered flask of vintage wine he'd been saving for years. With a wistful sigh, he poured half a bowl for himself, then raised the other toward Shi Feng in wordless celebration. Before long, Jack's cheeks were rosy, and he slumped face first onto the table, fast asleep from the wine's warmth. Without a second thought, Shi Feng ducked under the table, gently lifted Jack into his arms, and carried him off to bed. After tucking the elderly man in, he climbed to the rooftop, for nightfall was his chosen hour of cultivation. Although Shi Feng had already awakened his innate spiritual power, he refused to grow complacent. According to Master Yu Xiaogang's treatise, once one's spiritual power reached the threshold for an upgrade, it would stagnate without securing a spirit ring. Continued practice might not yield any immediate breakthroughs, but the moment he claimed that ring, all the stored potential would erupt, propelling his power to the next level. With that in mind, Shi Feng settled into a disciplined routine. He focused on channeling and refining his spiritual energy until each movement felt ingrained in his very bones. Only when exhaustion clouded his vision did he finally grant himself rest, collapsing onto the cool rooftop tiles. Staring up at the midnight sky, he felt an odd knot twisting in his stomach, an unsettling blend of nerves and anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, his journey had only just begun. Shi Feng followed his usual routine, this time choosing not to summon his martial spirit. Almost immediately, his body shifted into the corpse transformation state, a form in which absorbing the essence of Soul Moon became far more efficient. Yet the moment he began his cultivation, he realized something astonishing. He could peer directly into his own dantian. It felt like a rare blessing. As he guided the corpse physique's spiritual chi, essentially the world's own soul energy, through his meridians, he watched it converge into his dantian, just as 100 rivers pour into the sea. When the last of that energy settled, Shi Feng froze in awe. Before him floated a perfect sphere the size of a ping-pong ball, pulsing with every ounce of the returning chi. The orb was split down the middle, one half as black as night, the other aglow with dazzling gold. That aura stirred a strange familiarity in him. The ink-black side was unmistakably the energy of his corpse martial spirit, the very same source as the internal force he had painstakingly cultivated. Yet what of the golden half? As Shi Feng stared in wonder, he sensed that this unexpected revelation might redefine the limits of his power. The instant Shi Feng's martial soul awakened, a brilliant golden aura of lightning erupted from within him, something he'd never sensed before. It swept away the swirling five-colored lightning in an instant. "What is this?" he whispered, heart pounding. "How could I have never felt it until now?" He knew there was something living inside him, a foreign object lodged in his dantian, yet he'd never once perceived it, until this very moment. A sudden thought occurred to him. Could it be a Niden? Driven by equal parts excitement and caution, Shi Feng summoned his spirit power and reached out to probe the mysterious orb. Almost immediately, he realized his mistake. As soon as his consciousness touched its surface, an immense torrent of memories flooded into his mind, memories stretching back thousands of years. His soul buckled under the weight of that ancient knowledge. A stabbing pain erupted behind his eyes, and every nerve in his body screamed in agony. He thrashed wildly, gasping as the memories bore down on him like a tidal wave. Within seconds, he collapsed, unconscious. Yet even as he lay limp, his body twitched uncontrollably, his features contorted in torment, as though the battle for his soul had only just begun. The notification chimed in Shi Feng's mind. Ding! Host inheritance process initiated. Super zombie evolution system activated. Loading. Shi Feng blinked, as though awakening from a dream. In that vision, he'd watched the rise and fall of a single zombie across millennia, observing its every stage like a detached spectator. At first, it was nothing more than a shambling corpse, weak and aimless. But as centuries passed, it mastered the art of bloodlust, drinking deep from the life force of mortals until it transcended mere flesh. After 1,000 years of relentless feeding, the creature's limbs grew rigid yet graceful. It learned to soar into the sky and burrow through the earth as though gravity itself were its plaything. It preyed on powerful cultivators, drawing out their spiritual core as if it were wine, and its name became a byword for terror among both mortals and immortals. 10,000 years later, the zombie achieved a state far beyond death and life. It had become immortal, an abomination so fearsome that even demons and celestial deities quailed at its approach. Then, at the pinnacle of its evolution, the creature underwent a final, cataclysmic transformation into something called Ba. This metamorphosis was more than an upgrade. It was an apocalyptic event that darkened the skies, warping the very fabric of the world. Every living being writhed in terror as the world's colors bled away under this ultimate calamity. And then, just as suddenly, the colossal power that had reshaped reality consumed the zombie itself. In a blinding flash, it disintegrated into nothing but ash. All that remained was a single, ominous artifact, a corpse pill, pulsing with the residue of unimaginable might. Shi Feng's head throbbed as the system's final message scrolled through his vision. Inheritance complete. Please confirm receipt of core data. Corpse pill. He took a shaky breath, steeling himself. Whatever lay ahead, he now carried within him the essence of that primal horror, its strengths, its memories, its legacy. And with this inheritance, his own journey had only just begun. A jagged bolt of heavenly lightning had pursued the corpse pill across realms, turning an unfortunate young man to ash as it blasted through Earth, until at last it landed upon the Douluo continent and into the body of a stillborn infant. The morning sun wasn't hot, but its brightness was almost blinding. Shi Feng lay sprawled on the rooftop, his body stiff and aching. Gradually, his awareness crept back, accompanied by a faint tickling on his cheek. He opened his eyes to discover a tiny bird perched on his nose, pecking at him. "Hey, stop that," he grumbled, gently flicking the bird aside. Then, sitting up slowly, he frowned. "Who am I? Where am I?" For a moment, his mind was a blank slate. Then memories flooded in, shards of his past life, followed by 6 years of training on the Douluo continent. He recalled that his name was Shi Feng. He remembered practicing his spirit power late last night, when, without warning, his mental force had struck the bead in his dantian. An unbearable pain had surged through him, and then darkness. He had dreamed something, though the details now hovered at the edge of his mind, as clear as mist. Concentrating, he found the dream sliding back into focus, ready to reveal its secrets. Shi Feng's heart thudded as he recalled the corpse pill's arrival on the Douluo continent in his dream. A cold tremor ran through him. There really was a bead inside his body. Could it be that none of this had been a dream? He closed his eyes and poured his spirit power into his dantian. There, nestled at his core, floated a small orb, silently drawing in his life force. Half of it was pitch black, the other half glowed gold, veins of crackling lightning dancing across its surface. In an instant, the Fana-El memory of his dream burst back into focus. A bolt of golden thunder hunting down a black corpse pill, both hurtling toward the Douluo continent. As if sunlight-piercing storm clouds, understanding bloomed within Shi Feng. This strange orb was the very corpse pill from his vision, only now it had fused with that terrifying sky thunder. He thought back to his days as a zombie, wandering without will or memory, and felt a fresh wave of shock at how far his life had changed and how much remained hidden within that crackling bead at his core. Shi Feng stared numbly at the fading image in his mind, an entity born of heaven and earth's resentment, a creature that fed on blood, spurned reincarnation, refused to descend into hell, and flouted lightning itself. It had roamed the 9 heavens and the netherworld alike, traversing the darkest recesses of yin and malevolence. Yet in the end, it had fallen in a cataclysm that ushered it into an even higher plane. From the zombie's fractured memories, Shi Feng pieced together the legend of that realm. The being was called the Ba, more commonly known as the Drought Demon. Wherever the Drought Demon trod, it left behind a wasteland of scorched earth stretching thousands of miles. A deadly plague accompanied its passage, capable of obliterating entire civilizations. It sustained itself on the blood of dragons, and both gods and demons trembled at the mere whisper of its name. At that level of power, nothing beneath heaven or above earth could touch it. The skies could not contain it, nor could the earth confine it. As Shi Feng reeled from the enormity of what he'd seen, a sudden, childlike voice rang out inside his head, so sharp and unexpected that he nearly toppled off the rooftop. "Congratulations, host. Martial spirit awakened. Super Zombie Evolution System activated. You have received your beginner's gift pack." Shi Feng's heart pounded as he struggled to stand upright. A whirlwind of questions swirled through his mind, but one thing was certain. His life had just been irrevocably changed. Chapter 11. The Newbie's Cheat Gift Pack. Shi Feng's expression went slack, as if all the color had drained from his face. Then, without warning, he threw his head back and laughed, wildly, joyously, so that anyone nearby would hear the exhilaration in his voice. Perched on his shoulder, the little black sparrow chirped, almost as if it shared in his delight. Yet its eyes remained dull, lacking the usual spark of life. "Off you go. Play by yourself," Shi Feng said with a warm smile, stroking the bird's tiny head. This sparrow wasn't an ordinary pet, but his corpse puppet, his eyes and ears in the outside world. Through it, nothing in Holy Soul Village escaped his notice. Leaning back, Shi Feng's eyes glittered with excitement. So, what exactly is this newbie gift pack? For 6 years he'd labored under the same routine, his only breakthrough a single spirit exercise that he'd once mistaken for a golden ticket. Little did he know that an even greater surprise awaited him. The moment his martial soul finally awakened, a strange system interface had materialized in his mind, as clear as day. System interface hostname, Shi Feng Douluo, level 10. Zombie level 112. Soul rings, 0 inventory, none. A prompt flickered before him. "Do you wish to open the newbie gift pack?" Shi Feng didn't hesitate. He selected yes, eager to discover just how powerful this mysterious gift might be. Shi Feng activated the novice gift pack and watched as 3 items materialized in his inventory: a God-given spirit ring, a spirit ring upgrade coupon, and a bottle of dark blessing potion. The spirit ring had been generated to match his own attributes perfectly. Its lifespan depended entirely on the host's physical strength and willpower. The longer the host endured during the absorption process, the longer the ring would last. If he chose to use the upgrade coupon, he could extend a ring's lifespan up to the maximum his body could tolerate, but only for rings between levels 11 and 20. The Dark Blessing Potion, meanwhile, promised to heal every wound he'd sustained, restoring him to peak condition. Grinning in satisfaction, Shi Feng thought, "It's like someone handed me a pillow just as I was about to doze off." He'd only just awakened his martial soul, and his soul power was at full capacity from birth. All that remained was to claim his first spirit ring, and with it, break through to the Soul Master realm, so he could press on with his cultivation. Shi Feng had barely set foot in Notting College when he realized his first spirit ring might already be within reach, sooner than he dared hope. The temptation to ascend to Soul Master status was impossible to resist. His heart pounded at the promise of miraculous powers. Without a second thought, he vaulted off his bed and sprinted down the hall toward Old Jack's room. Last night's revelry had left Old Jack deep in slumber. He was still out cold. Shi Feng peered inside, satisfied that his roommate posed no obstacle. Grinning, he slipped away and raced back to his own quarters, eager to claim what destiny had already placed in his grasp. Shutting the door behind him, he took a deep breath and sank to the floor, legs crossed in meditation posture. The room's familiar clutter faded from his mind as he summoned the system interface into view. There, suspended in midair, hovered the brilliantly hued ring that the gods had bestowed upon him. Absorb Spirit Ring? He selected with a single thought. Instantly, a stern warning box snapped into focus. You must endure your first tribulation within 3 days of absorption. Survival through the entire tribulation greatly increases your chances of success. Do you wish to proceed? Shi Feng's stomach growled in protest, reminding him he'd had neither food nor water since dawn. Yet the cautionary note struck him like a bucket of ice water. Tribulation? A test for a greenhorn like him this early? He stared at the prompt, pulse racing. Was the system playing some cruel joke on him, or was this truly the cost of power? Taking a steadying breath, he squared his shoulders. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. With resolute fingers, he confirmed, proceed. The memory of that zombie being shattered to ash by the heavenly tribulation flashed unbidden through Shi Feng's mind, and it was horrifying. He still felt the echo of those 5-colored divine thunderbolts that struck when his martial soul first awakened yesterday. That, he realized, must have been the catastrophe the system had warned him about. A cold sweat broke out across his small body. He remembered how, in the lower realms, tribulations had been manageable, almost non-existent. Yet as soon as he touched this threshold, the calamity had struck with full force. System, why am I still so weak and yet forced to face this? He demanded inwardly, only to be met with silence. The system could alert him, but it gave no explanations. Shi Feng's young face tightened into a frown. The thrill of obtaining the system yesterday had drained away, leaving him with nothing but confusion. He carried another's memories, those of the zombie, but they weren't truly his. He had no real experience to rely on. Why must I suffer so much? I'm only 6 years old. He thought bleakly, his eyes glistening, though no tears fell. No wonder his eyelids had been twitching ever since his martial spirit first awakened. Shi Feng's heart raced as the last rumble of thunder faded into silence. He hadn't expected the lightning strike to actually hit him, just a wild guess at best. Stunned, he lay on the scorched earth for a long moment, struggling to accept the shocking reality of what had just happened. At last, he pushed himself upright and glanced down at the handful of items glowing softly in his inventory, all novice rewards, but potentially life-saving. He tapped each one to review its description. God-given Spirit Ring. The longer you endure, the stronger the ring you receive, and the greater your power once you absorb it. Survive the tribulation, and your chance of victory rises. Dark Blessing Potion. Grants an extra life in the midst of calamity. Best saved for the direst moment. Soul Ring Upgrade Coupon. Applies only after breaking through your current cultivation stage. Most effective when used at or above level 20. Premature use diminishes its benefit. Shi Feng closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. The tribulation loomed ahead like a mountain of crackling lightning and roaring wind, a challenge few cultivators ever survived. But he had no intention of turning back now. His entire journey hinged on this trial. He made his plan. He would push himself to the brink, drawing on the God-given Spirit Ring to amplify his strength. If the heavenly fury grew too fierce, he'd swallow the Dark Blessing Potion at the last possible instant, a second chance to endure. And should he break through to the next realm, he'd immediately unleash the Soul Ring Coupon at level 20, squeezing every bit of power from it. Opening his eyes, Shi Feng felt his resolve harden. No matter how brutal the storm, he would face it head-on and emerge stronger on the other side. Cultivation was his path, and he would see it through to the end. Shi Feng stared at the darkening sky outside his window and let out a slow breath. With exactly 3 months until classes began at Notting College, he needed a solid plan for crossing the upcoming tribulation. Rushing to absorb a spirit ring right away felt reckless. What if his soul power wasn't ready? If he trained diligently first, then took in the ring later, his soul strength might jump several levels, and he'd face the catastrophe with far more confidence. After only 3 years of cultivation, he was far from a prodigy, and the slightest misstep during a calamity could be fatal. Steady, careful progress was the key to survival. Reluctantly, he pushed down the urge to claim his spirit ring immediately. Jolting out of bed, Shi Feng's eyes landed on the unopened newcomer's gift pack sitting on his desk. 3 more months before he could even use it. What a disappointment. The weight of the looming disaster pressed on his mind, leaving him restless. He shook his head, refusing to be paralyzed by fear. No more waiting, he told himself. Time to train. For the past few years, Shi Feng had devoted himself entirely to mastering the heavenly corpse transformation, neglecting any conventional physical training. Now, faced with the urgent need for a stronger body to absorb a soul ring, he felt a new kind of pressure. The 10,000-year corpse pill coursing through his veins had refined the soul power he'd cultivated over 3 years into something fiercely toxic. Though the undead traits granted him extraordinary strength and endurance, he still sensed a glaring deficiency in his physique. At dawn, Shi Feng slipped outside. The early morning light stretched across the courtyard, prime time for rigorous training. Ever since Dujie's ominous warning, the threat of imminent danger had hovered over him like a sharpened blade. There was no room for complacency. Yet after only a few minutes of jogging, Shi Feng realized how little challenge it posed. With his current reserves of strength, a simple run offered virtually no conditioning benefit. He needed to push himself much harder, real, high-intensity exercise that would test every muscle and force him to break through his limits. Only then could he hope to forge the robust body required to withstand and absorb a soul ring. Shi Feng burst through the village gate, his eyes sparkling as they fell on the perfect makeshift weight. The other villagers, men and women alike, caught sight of him charging in and shrieked, sprinting back to their homes and bolting the doors. Shi Feng only grinned. Now that he'd moved back in with old Jack, it wouldn't be long before everyone realized he wasn't the same kid they used to know. He strode up to a massive stone mill used by Holy Spirit Village to grind millet. At first glance it towered over him, but Shi Feng wrapped his arms around the huge granite roller anyway. He shifted it from side to side, estimating its weight at 700 or 800 caddies. "Not bad at all," he laughed. "You'll be my training partner from now on." Cradling the stone like a newborn, he turned and strode away, roaring with laughter. Tang Hao's cottage stood just inside the village gate. Today, for a rare change, Tang Hao had risen early. Tang San had already slipped off up the mountain to train. Stretching and rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Tang Hao stepped outside, just in time to watch Shi Feng disappearing down the dusty lane, still chuckling and hoisting his new weight on one shoulder. Chapter 12. Tang San attacks the rabbit. Tang Hao sat on the front steps of his home, cradling a steaming bowl of porridge Tang San had prepared. He'd barely lifted the spoon to his lips when a blur of motion caught his eye. The little boy Shi Feng rushing past, an enormous stone roller clutched in his arms. With a strangled "pfft," Tang Hao's mouthful of porridge shot across the courtyard. Gulping in shock, Tang Hao stared after Shi Feng, his face pale. He knew that stone roller must weigh well over 100 jin, 50 kilograms at least. And yet here was this 6-year-old hauling it off like a wooden toy. In all his years at the Clear Sky School, he'd seen gifted children, but none so young and powerful. A 6-year-old who could lift 100 jin was exceptional. One who could sprint with 8 times that burden was unthinkable. He'd always been proud of his own son's innate talent. Tang San had been born under a rare celestial sign, but beside Shi Feng, Tang San's strength suddenly felt modest. Tang Hao's mind replayed yesterday's events, when Shi Feng had awakened his martial soul in a swirl of visions of divine punishment raining down from the heavens. Now, watching the boy's raw, effortless power, Tang Hao felt equal measures of awe and resolve harden in his heart. What exactly had he unleashed? And what would come next? Their Clear Sky Hammer, martial spirit from the Clear Sky School, ranks among the finest on the Douluo continent, yet its awakening pales beside even a fraction of what Shi Feng has just unleashed. A god-level spirit. It has to be a god-level spirit. Tang Hao's heart thundered. He'd studied the legends and secrets of such spirits, and those few fortunate enough to awaken one possessed truly terrifying potential. The most famous example was the Angel Family branch of the Spirit Hall, where the most prodigious disciples reportedly awakened with innate 20th-tier spirit power. And now, staring in disbelief at Shi Feng's newly revealed martial spirit, Tang Hao felt a surge of exhilaration. For years he'd languished in despair since his wife's death, her killer still roaming free under Wu Hundian's protection. Although Tang Hao had gravely wounded Ji Chihiro in his quest for vengeance, the injuries he inflicted were nowhere near fatal. Conversely, Ji Chihiro had struck back with a wound that would never fully heal. Under Wu Hundian's ever-growing might, Tang Hao's own life had become a painful struggle with little hope for triumph. But with Shi Feng's unprecedented god-level awakening, Tang Hao dared to dream again. Perhaps now, just perhaps, he could finally strike back at Wu Hundian and avenge his beloved. Ain's vendetta may be personal, but the Wuhun Palace slaughtered countless disciples of our Clear Sky School and drove us into hiding for years. That crime demands retribution. When Chihiro-ji succumbed to his injuries shortly after his return, even Tang Hao's fury had cooled somewhat, but the debt of blood still needed to be paid. He petitioned the Spirit Hall to atone for the disgrace visited upon the sect. Then Shi Feng appeared, and hope stirred anew. If this boy could grow strong, there might finally be a chance to overthrow the Wuhun Palace. That is why Tang Hao resolved to keep Shi Feng close. If young Xiaosan wishes to enroll at the academy, let him, Tang Hao murmured with a half-smile. He can look after the boy. He sighed softly at the thought. By the time he finished speaking, Shi Feng had already darted out of the village, clutching a stone roller as he sprinted toward his next adventure. Shi Feng was drenched in sweat, yet his eyes sparkled with excitement. His muscles were screaming, but he felt more alive than ever. Clinging to the back of a massive stone roller, his small frame and the huge boulder thundered past the village entrance. Tang Hao watched in stunned silence for a moment, then let out a low whistle. So that's what he's been up to, working out. A handful of frightened villagers spilled into the street, rubbing their bleary eyes. One of them shouted, "Hey, where'd the stone roller go? It was here just a moment ago. What happened to it?" Suddenly someone pointed toward the road. "Look over there. The roller. It's got legs, and it's moving." Everyone turned. Beneath the monolithic stone they now saw two powerful legs, carrying it swiftly toward the gate. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Could a stone really be alive? As the roller drew closer, the villagers finally caught sight of the figure behind it. Their jaws dropped, and they stumbled backward in shock. How is this possible?" someone whispered, voice trembling. The villagers stopped in their tracks. That stone roller must have weighed at least a few dozen jin, enough that 4 or 5 grown men would struggle to lift it. Yet here it was, cradled in the arms of a 6-year-old boy who was running laps with it like it was nothing. "He's insane!" someone cried out in horror. "Is he having an epileptic fit? Why would he be carrying a stone roller around?" Another voice added, "The stone roller is his now. I wouldn't dare touch it." Unfazed by their whispers, Shi Feng grinned as he pounded past the village entrance. His lungs burned with exhilaration. "Hey, Xiaosan," he called. Tang San, just returning from his own training, rabbit squirming in one hand, stopped dead in his tracks. He stared in disbelief as Shi Feng thundered past, the massive roller tucked under his arm. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. After a long beat, he managed to stammer, "Pervert." Shi Feng didn't even slow down. Laughing to himself, he completed 2 more circuits of the clearing before gently setting the stone roller back in its original spot. Then, breathing easily, he stepped away, already plotting his next round. Shi Feng panted like a draft animal, his clothes plastered to his skin with sweat, but for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. In that last set of exercises, he hadn't drawn on a drop of soul power. He'd relied entirely on brute strength to haul the heavy stone roller around the courtyard 10 times. Now, coming to a stop, he gently circulated his soul energy, and immediately a soothing warmth spread through every fiber of his being. His limbs tingled as if waking up from a long slumber, and he could almost feel his muscles knitting together, growing tougher by the second. Deep in his dantian, the corpse pill began its slow, hypnotic rotation. As it absorbed the returning flow of soul power along his meridians, the bead unleashed a fresh surge of vitality that flooded back into Shi Feng's body. He reached down to touch it, marveling at its half-black, half-gold sheen. Sky thunder and corpse pill. Can this still be called a corpse pill? He mused. He'd attempted countless times to actively harness its power, but the bead was stubbornly inert. He could only let it passively purify the soul energy he cultivated. Recalling the zombie's prodigious strength, Shi Feng knew this mysterious bead must be an extraordinary treasure. It pained him that he couldn't unlock its full potential. Lost in thought, he glanced up and caught sight of Tang San tripping over his own feet, a sheepish grin on his face. Tang San stood in his courtyard, a gray rabbit writhing in his left hand and a kitchen knife trembling in his right. He stared at the animal, utterly at a loss. Watching Shi Feng's tales of lavish meals and abundant meat, Tang San had only just realized how starved he was. He wasn't gaunt or jaundiced, but he felt hollowed out. Every day of smithing with his father burned through his strength faster than he could replenish it on plain porridge. Catching small game wasn't difficult for him. After all, his training made him fast and precise, and today's prize was this very rabbit. Tang Hao stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching, but offering no help. The man had no trouble felling a person in a fight, yet he'd never assisted in dispatching something as harmless as a rabbit. Tang San swallowed his unease and finally forced himself to act. He pressed the creature's head to the dirt, tightened his grip, and raised the knife. His heart hammered. Just as he was about to strike, the courtyard gate creaked open. "Tang San, what are you doing?" Shi Feng called out breezily as he stepped inside, eyebrows lifting at the sight of the struggle. Tang San froze, knife paused midair, caught between relief at the interruption and embarrassment at being discovered in such a grim moment. Tang San froze mid-slice and flushed a little. I'm skinning a rabbit." Shi Feng stared at him, momentarily speechless. Thankfully, Tang San didn't know his friend Xiaoxue yet, otherwise he'd have earned herself a swift kick for butchering the poor thing so clumsily. Shi Feng sighed and held out his hand. "Let me do it. Your fingers are all thumbs." Tang San's eyes lit up. He handed over the rabbit and the knife without hesitation. He'd tasted Shi Feng's cooking just yesterday and was already looking forward to another feast. Shi Feng positioned the rabbit on the wooden block and motioned for Tang San to grab its hind legs. "Hold it steady," he instructed. "Got it," Tang San said, mustering his best grip on the struggling animal. Their father, Tang Hao, leaned against the doorway, watching the pair with a pleased expression. "Shi Feng, why don't you stay for lunch today?" he called out. Shi Feng wiped his blade clean and shook his head with a wry smile. "I'd love to, but I still have to go back and cook for my grandpa." Tang Hao chuckled and waved a hand. "All right, then bring that old dong, bring your grandpa along too." Chapter 13, Su Yuntao's Sorrow. After the feast, old Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbed his comfortably rounded belly, and let out a contented belch. He just enjoyed one of Shi Feng's home-cooked meals and was clearly in high spirits as he bid everyone good night. During dinner, Tang Hao finally relented and agreed to send his daughter, Tang San, to the Junior Soul Master Academy in Notting City. A weight lifted from his chest at the decision. Since childhood, Tang San had been dutiful, thoughtful, and eager to learn. Tang Hao wanted nothing more than to see her secure a bright future, far removed from the shadow of her dissolute father. As for Shi Feng, Tang Hao resolved to recommend him to the Spirit Hall. Their reputation for nurturing raw talent was unmatched, and Shi Feng would receive the finest instruction available there. With only one work-study slot allotted to Holy Soul Village, it made perfect sense that Tang San should take it. In years to come, Holy Soul Village would produce 2 Soul Masters, one of whom was destined to climb all the way to title Douluo. Tang Hao allowed himself a rare, hopeful smile. But once the guests departed and the lanterns dimmed, Su Yuntao's bright expression faltered. In the hush that followed, a profound sorrow settled in her heart. Old Jack's voice boomed as he ran through his sums, already picturing the Holy Soul Village reaching unprecedented heights under his command. He fancied himself its greatest chief, certain his name would be honored by villagers for generations to come. After breakfast, Shi Feng rose to leave, but Tang Hao gently caught his sleeve. "Feng, I saw you hauling that stone roller this morning. Planning to work out again?" Shi Feng nodded. "Yes. I heard that the stronger your body, the easier it is to absorb soul rings later on." Tang Hao grinned. "Exactly. Peak physical fitness gives you a real edge when you take soul rings. Here's an idea. Why don't you train with me at the forge? Hammering iron is one of the toughest workouts you can get, just as effective as your runs. Plus, you'll have Xiaoxue there for company." Shi Feng's eyes lit up. Blacksmithing would be a perfect way to build strength, and he'd even get to watch Tang Hao's famed chaotic wind hammer technique in action. Of course, without a hammer-type martial soul of his own, mastering that skill wouldn't do him much good. But it was still an opportunity he didn't want to miss. Shi Feng decided that the most important thing was to forge iron alongside Uncle Tang Hao. It would not only improve his skills, but also deepen their bond. Although he couldn't honestly say he'd been fond of Tang San in his past life, his cautious nature told him that hitching his fortunes to Tang San's reputation was the safest path to ascending as a divine spirit master. "All right, Uncle," Shi Feng said without hesitation. He planned to spend his mornings on endurance runs and his afternoons apprenticing at Tang Hao's smithy. 3 months of hard training and daily hammering at the anvil seemed like a fulfilling way to pass the time. In just a few weeks, even Tang San's opinion of Shi Feng shifted dramatically. The boy found Shi Feng pleasant company, especially when he cooked dinner. As long as Shi Feng didn't suddenly go off the rails, Tang San figured they'd get along just fine. Meanwhile, in the Soulmaster Hall, Su Yuntao burst into Master Maxinuo's office, breathless with excitement. "Who is this?" A sharply irritated voice rang out. Master Maxinuo looked up from his desk. "Don't you even know how to knock before barging in?" Su Yuntao froze for a moment, then recognized the familiar scowl. "Ah, it's just you, sir. I got carried away." He swallowed nervously, clutching his report. "Master, I have news you'll want to hear at once." "Becoming a soul master demands absolute focus and inner calm," Matthew Nuo admonished. "Without those qualities, you'll remain stuck below the first breakthrough, just as I am." Su Yuntao merely chuckled, unfazed by the rebuke. He brandished the parchment in his hand, eyes shining with excitement. "Master Nuo, yesterday I encountered an extraordinary talent in Saint Soul Village. I'm convinced his martial soul is of god-level rarity. I've already prepared a detailed report. Could you please submit it to the Pope's palace?" A flush of anticipation colored Su Yuntao's cheeks. He had tried and failed to outdo Shi Feng before, but this discovery was different. Once the Holy See received word, the Pope himself would be forced to take notice. And Su Yuntao, hailed as the hero who unearthed this prodigy, would surely be rewarded with promotion, a generous stipend, and perhaps even the affection of the lovely and notoriously aloof Sisi. In that moment, Su Yuntao was certain his fortunes were about to soar. Master Matthew Nuo's expression darkened the moment he heard Su Yuntao's claim. He snapped. "What nonsense are you spouting? Do you take a god-grade martial soul for a cabbage? In all our Wuhan Temple records, only the Pope's ancestral line has ever produced a god-grade martial soul. And you're telling me one just popped up in some forgotten mountain corner? You must have a donkey's kick rattling your brains." Su Yuntao paled under Matthew Nuo's glare, but hurried to defend himself. "Master Nuo, I swear it's true. Every villager in Saint Soul Village witnessed the awakening ceremony. You can send investigators if you doubt me. I've recorded the entire process in meticulous detail. Once this report reaches His Holiness the Pope, he won't ignore it." Matthew Nuo surveyed the report, pages upon pages in Su Yuntao's precise hand. With every turn, his brow grew heavier, and the faintest flicker of doubt appeared in his eyes. After a long pause, Master Mashu Nuo snapped the report shut with a heavy thud. "Well done," he said in a low voice. "You've made an outstanding contribution this time, but this matter is far too important to leave unverified. I'll dispatch someone to the Holy Soul Village to confirm the details before we officially file your report. Don't worry, If everything checks out, your reward will be more than you deserve. Thank you, Master Mashu Nuo, Su Yuntao replied, bowing deeply. His eyes shone with excitement. Mashu Nuo set the report aside and regarded him thoughtfully. By the way, he said, I heard you're still pursuing that girl, Cici? Su Yuntao's face flushed at the mention of her name, and he nodded shyly. Mashu Nuo sighed. Listen to me. Cici isn't right for you. I appreciate your concern, Master, Su Yuntao said hastily, pushing himself to his feet. But I must go now. I promised Cici dinner tonight. With that, he bowed again and hurried out. Mashu Nuo watched his retreating figure, pity flickering in his ancient weary eyes. Then his gaze slid to the stack of papers before him, Shi Feng's report. He reopened it, scanning the pages with growing intensity. Minutes later, his expression went ice cold. With deliberate force, he began tearing out sheet after sheet. Rip, rip. Matthew Nuo tore the report to shreds, then flicked the confetti of paper into the wastebasket with a scornful laugh. Su Yuntao, don't say I didn't warn you about sabotaging your own future, he sneered, his voice icy. While I'm in charge of the Nodding City branch, my word is law. And you, Shi Feng, you're out of luck. If you vanish underground, don't blame me, blame Su Yuntao. At 81 years old, the newly minted chief deacon's face was creased with malice. Decades of unwavering service had finally secured his current post, and with the branch master's seat now vacant, he had no intention of stepping aside. Instead, he planned to claim it for himself, come what may. Chapter 14. Killer? Shi Feng tapped his pen nervously against the polished wood of his desk. If he handed this report in now, would he still have any chance at the promotion? He rubbed his temples, lost in thought, when the door behind him flew open. A tall, slender figure slipped into the room and quietly locked the door. She looked no more than 17 or 18, standing close to 1.8 meters in height. Her form was striking, slim yet generously curved, and her face was exquisitely beautiful. Every movement she made seemed to draw the light around her. Master Matthew Nuo, she said, her voice soft as silk and just as intoxicating. Matthew Nuo's eyes lit up at once, a knowing smile spreading across his face. He rose from his chair and beckoned her over. Cici, he purred, what brings you here tonight? Come closer, let me welcome you properly. Without hesitation, Cici moved to his side and slipped onto his lap, tucking herself into his arms. She traced lazy circles on his chest with one slender finger. I don't want to talk to that idiot Su Yuntao anymore, she muttered, her tone edged with petulance. Matthew chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Why not? He's only been asking after you. Cici huffed and tightened her grip around his shoulders. He's useless, always clowning around, never serious. I'd rather be here with you. Shi Feng watched them exchange banter with a wry expression. He had no idea what tangled history lay between Cici, Matthew Nuo, and Su Yuntao, but one thing was clear. Trouble was brewing, and he'd have to decide whether to stay out of it or step in. Matthew Nuo felt a flush of heat roll through him, but he forced himself to speak evenly. I heard you've been spending a lot of time with Shi Feng lately. Cici gave him a playful tap on the chest and arched an eyebrow. Please, I'm just teasing him. Don't get so worked up. She brushed a lock of hair from her face, smiling. I even told Shi Feng to back off, but the kid hardly ever listens. Matthew sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Before he could say anything else, Cici added in a sweet, almost teasing voice, By the way, I'm starving. She fixed him with big, pleading eyes. His heart skipped a beat. Here, he whispered, voice husky. Cici hesitated, her cheeks coloring as she looked up at him. 10 minutes later, Matthew was panting, sweat gleaming on his forehead, his eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost. He'd come so close to passing out that it frightened him. He'd never experienced anything like it. Could it really have been too much? Cici reached out and touched his arm gently, concern softening her features. Hey, are you all right? Matthew shook his head, cheeks burning with embarrassment. There was no way he could confess just how overwhelming those moments had been. Go on back downstairs, Matthew Nuo called after her. I've got some business to attend to this afternoon. Cici rose gracefully, smoothing her makeup. Sweetheart, about that promise you made. Matthew waved her off with a charming smile. Don't you worry, I'll keep the hallmaster seat warm for you. Her lips curved into a satisfied smile. She gave him an exaggerated swish of her hips on the way out the door and threw him a playful wink. I love you. The instant she slipped from the room, Matthew's bright expression faltered. He murmured to himself, poor gullible girl. I did agree to help her claim the hall master post. I just didn't say when. I'll keep her dangling until I get bored. As the door clicked shut behind her, Cece's doe-eyed act vanished. She crossed her arms and sneered at the empty room. If it weren't for his precious status, would I ever deign to serve that sleazy old man? Such a waste. Her gaze darkened with ambition. Su Yuntao's handsome, strong. Once I'm hall master, I'll give him a real chance. Down in the hall, Su Yuntao paced restlessly, running his fingertips along the banister. When Cece finally descended the staircase, his face lit up. Cece, where did you slip off to just now? He asked, eager. Lie, we'd agreed to meet for lunch at noon. Cece floated over, her smile bright. I just popped in to ask Master Mashuno a few questions. I'm not that hungry, just going to grab something light. Su Yuntao's eyes sparkled at the sight of her gentle countenance and the faint blush on her cheeks. Cece, you look absolutely radiant today. She arched an eyebrow, teasing him. Flattery won't get you anywhere. Well, he cleared his throat. I'm on the verge of making it big. Yesterday You awakened a god-level martial soul? Cece cut in, surprised. Su Yuntao bobbed his head enthusiastically and launched into an animated recap of his awakening ceremony and how he'd already asked Master Ma to submit his report. He shot Cece a hopeful look, convinced her opinion of him had just skyrocketed. Isn't that incredible? I'll keep you posted once it's official. Cece offered a sweet, congratulatory smile, while inwardly she was already plotting. She wouldn't let Su Yuntao steamroll her for the position of palace master. With her charm, she was certain the old pervert master Ma Shunuo would have no trouble backing her claim. Once Cece and Su Yuntao had gone, Ma Shunuo slipped out of the hall in silence. He drew a black cloak around his shoulders and stepped through the spirit hall's back door. Shi Feng stepped into the little restaurant, so ordinary it might have been mistaken for any other eatery in the city. He approached the hostess at the counter and, in a low, gravelly voice, said, I'm from the outer world. I need passage to hell. The hostess's eyes flickered with surprise, but she recovered immediately and nodded. Right this way, honored guest. She led him into a secluded booth at the back. With a deft press against the wall, she revealed a hidden door. Together, they slipped into a dimly lit corridor that wound downward beneath the city streets. I want to see your chief helmsman, Shi Feng announced, producing a brass token stamped with an arcane seal. The hostess took the token with respectful hesitation. Please wait here. I'll inform him of your arrival. Shi Feng settled into the high-backed chair, utterly at ease. He'd navigated these secret passages before. None of it unnerved him. 30 minutes later, the hostess returned and guided him deeper into the subterranean labyrinth, finally ushering him into a vast chamber. Behind a massive wooden desk sat a tall, middle-aged man. He wore a terrifying Asura mask, its carved features frozen in a fierce snarl, and a blood-red aura pulsed around his broad frame, making the small room feel oppressively hot. A single sealed dossier lay before him. Silently, the helmsman lifted the document and stared at Shi Feng. Then, tapping the cover, he growled, Eliminate a 6-year-old child? Shi Feng's father folded the mission dossier with a sharp snap. You're to stage an accidental death in Holy Soul Village, he ordered. Send a bronze envoy. Shi Feng paused at the doorway. A bronze envoy was said to be stronger than 100 ordinary adults, surely overkill against a single target, let alone a child. No survivors, his father added flatly. Moments later, Shi Feng stepped into the room. He was tall and lean, with ink-black hair and pale skin. His long, slender fingers looked deceptively fragile, but the knuckles were pronounced, hinting at hard-earned strength. His jet-black eyes were unreadable, as though emotion itself had fled them. Father, he greeted in a low voice. His father's stern brow lifted. How many times have I told you? When you're on a mission, you're an assassin. At all other times, you must be invisible. Suppress your emotions. Blend in like anyone else. Shi Feng offered a slight nod, but said nothing. His father sighed, then tossed the dossier onto the desk. The papers fluttered toward Shi Feng like startled birds. This is your assignment, his father said. 3 days to complete it. Without breaking his composure, Shi Feng reached out and caught the paperwork midair. He glanced at it for barely a heartbeat, then tucked it under his arm, inclining his head in acknowledgement. Turning on silent feet, he left the room, every bit the unremarkable stranger he was meant to appear. The middle-aged smith stood in the doorway, watching the lone figure slip beyond the horizon. His eyes held a mixture of pride, affection, and a twinge of guilt he couldn't quite shake. Inside Tang Hao's forge, the steady clang of hammer on anvil echoed against soot-stained walls. Tang Hao himself lounged on a low stool, occasionally calling out pointers to the two young apprentices before him. In one corner, his son, Tang San, gripped a 20-caddy forging hammer their father had specially cast for him. Across from him stood Shi Feng, holding a far heavier tool, a 100-caddy mallet that Tang Hao reserved for his own use. It was the lightest of Tang Hao's personal hammers, yet he and Tang San exchanged astonished looks as they watched Shi Feng swing it with uncanny ease. It almost wasn't human. Undeterred by the weight, Shi Feng raised the hammer high and drove it down in a perfect thunderous arc. Sparks flew with each strike. Pride flared in Tang San's chest, and he pounded the anvil in defiance, determined to match Shi Feng blow for blow. 10 minutes passed. Tang San's arms trembled violently, sweat soaking his tunic and matting his hair to his forehead. He halted, breath ragged, nails digging into the handle for support. Shi Feng, by contrast, was only lightly damp with perspiration. With a final effortless swing, Shi Feng set the hammer aside and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. The forge fell silent, save for the hiss of cooling metal, and in that hush, Tang Hao knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. Putting Tang Hao's forging technique into practice proved to be just as punishing as training with the stone roller. Every muscle in his body screamed by the end. Tang San watched Shi Feng's steady rhythm with growing curiosity. Finally, he reached out, opened Shi Feng's palm, and blinked in surprise. The skin there was as soft and unblemished as ever. "What a pervert," Tang San muttered under his breath. Chapter 15, The Drowned Boy. Time flew by, and 2 days later, a pale light trembled on the horizon. Before dawn broke, a lone silhouette stood beneath an ancient oak just outside Holy Soul Village, clutching a weathered parchment. Though the boy appeared 11 or 12, he was in fact only 6. His face betrayed no hint of childhood. Cold, impassive eyes stared ahead, and long, sinewy fingers gripped the paper so tightly the knuckles shone white. This boy was Shi Feng. Only months ago, he had awakened his martial soul, a fearsome zombie soul that surged with full-strength power from the very moment of birth. In Holy Soul Village, whispers swept through every household. This child was already being called the Plague God, destined to wield terrifying abilities. Each morning, before anyone else stirred, Shi Feng would slip down to the riverbank, wade into the chill water, and fish in eerie silence, perhaps seeking to coax even greater strength from the flowing current. The dossier was astonishingly thorough. Every detail about Shi Feng had been catalogued, right down to a sketch of his face that was said to be virtually identical to the real thing. According to the file, the killer organization's intelligence team had spent an entire day cross-referencing local reports out of Holy Soul Village with Matthew Nuo's own notes. With seasoned operatives skilled in covert surveillance, gathering this information had apparently been child's play. Matthew Nuo had granted them 3 days to prepare. Now, with only 24 hours gone, the operatives were ready to move in on their target. A young assassin flipped through the dossier's final pages, then paused. "Zombie martial soul?" he read aloud, brow furrowed. "What the hell is that?" Assassins weren't strangers to supernatural phenomena. They'd been called upon to eliminate martial soul cultivators of every stripe. Their organization even maintained its own research division for cataloging unusual soul powers. Yet neither the young killer nor his peers had ever encountered anything called a zombie martial soul. He froze on the page describing Shi Feng's innate ability. A flicker of contempt crossed his expression. In his mind, the investigators had gone overboard, dredging up trivial details and inflating a 6-year-old child's talent into some sort of dire threat. Even if Shi Feng had been born with a genuine martial soul, what could a boy of 6 possibly do to elude a 19th-level soul master? The notion struck him as laughable and beneath such experienced killers. Shrugging, He slipped the dossier into his coat pocket. "Whatever," he muttered. "We'll see just how dangerous this kid really is." With that, the young assassin rose and strode out of the dimly lit safe house, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor as the clock began its inexorable countdown. He suspected that the villagers of Holy Soul Village were wildly exaggerating. Their vaunted natural strength wouldn't amount to much more than 100 jin. It was a pity the investigator hadn't witnessed Shi Feng tearing off with the millstone in his arms. Otherwise, he'd have circled the words "natural strength" in bright red ink and penned a detailed footnote. In fact, the original investigator had come to exactly the same conclusion as this young man now. The villagers' stories about Shi Feng's innate supernatural power were almost certainly embellishments. Still, the claim had been dutifully recorded in their report. "I like to fish by the river in the morning." The words, Shi Feng's own words, flashed through the boy's mind as he folded the files and tucked them neatly into his lapel. A glint of cold calculation shone in his deadpan eyes. Then, with a single snort, he called out, "Shadow!" The boy's yellow soul ring flared to life. In an instant, his entire form liquefied like molten silver and seeped into the darkened silhouette of the ancient tree beside him. There was no flicker, no whisper of movement, only the tree's shadow, impossibly still. No one nearby would suspect that the boy now lay in wait inside that very shade, perfectly concealed. His mission was simple: arrange Shi Feng's death so it looked like a tragic accident. If Shi Feng went down to the river to fish that morning, so much the better. If he stayed hidden all day, the boy would slip into Holy Soul Village under cover of darkness. He was adept in every imaginable method of killing: forest fire, venomous serpents, a careless fall into an unmarked well. No accident was beyond his expertise. So he waited, expression unreadable, body perfectly still within the tree's shadow. The morning light drifted across the grass. Shi Feng's life hung in the balance, and not a soul suspected a thing. Shi Feng had drawn his first blood when he was only 6 years old. Over time, his heart had turned to stone. Killing, even a child no older than himself, no longer stirred guilt within him. At most, he felt a fleeting pang of regret. Such remorse, however, was reserved not for the act of murder itself, but for the waste of a rare talent. The boy he killed had been brimming with soul power, a peerless genius and the pride of his entire village. A moment later, a slight figure stepped from the gates of Holy Soul Village. It was Tang San, who climbed the mountain each day to refine his craft. His footfalls were astonishingly light and precise. Each stride measured exactly 3 meters, every step mirroring the last in perfect harmony. As soon as he put some distance between himself and the village, Tang San surged forward, passing the ancient oak at a speed that blurred the air around him. Hidden among the shadows, Shi Feng watched with widening eyes. This was not his intended target, but the boy's performance left him breathless. A frail child of perhaps 5 or 6 moving with such supernatural swiftness. It was almost as if he were witnessing a force of nature rather than a mere mortal. Tang San's pace rivaled that of a warrior who had reached the 19th tier of strength. In that instant, Shi Feng realized he had underestimated the mountain's hidden prodigy and the danger he now faced. If the assassin hadn't cloaked himself in invisibility, Tang San would have seen the faint flicker of shock in his usually impassive eyes. But his mastery was absolute. No breath escaped him, no muscle twitched. Silent as a ghost, he watched Tang San vanish past the old oak and climb the mountain path under that cold, unblinking gaze. He remained perfectly still, coiled like a venomous snake in the underbrush, waiting for the precise moment to strike a lethal blow. Every second stretched out in taut anticipation, and yet Tang San pressed on, utterly unaware of the danger that shadowed his steps. Just then, another figure strolled from the gates of Holy Soul Village. It was Shi Feng, rising at dawn to gather his morning provisions. Having spent the night immersed in training, he felt neither haste nor fatigue, only a calm satisfaction. He ambled toward the riverbank, allowing the soft chorus of awakening birds and the sweet scent of dew-kissed blossoms to wash over him. In that peaceful hour, with sunlight spilling across the valley, Shi Feng closed his eyes and savored the simple joy of being alive. Shi Feng's footsteps were soft against the forest floor as he sang to himself, Your Majesty sent me to patrol the mountain and catch Tang San for breakfast. His voice trailed off as he passed beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak. Suddenly, his song died on his lips. He froze, nostrils flaring as he inhaled a faint, unfamiliar scent. Someone, or something, was nearby. Yet when he swept his gaze across the shaded grove, no one stood within sight. Curious, Shi Feng circled under the tree, eyes narrowed. Each time he rounded its wide trunk, he caught that elusive breath of presence. But there was never any form to match the sensation. He paused, bewildered. Strange, he murmured. Did I imagine it? With a light shrug, he shook off the unease. Whether my senses are off or not, I'll sort it out after I finish my patrol, and after some extra training. Having made up his mind, he tucked away the mystery and strode down the mountain path, still wearing a puzzled expression. No sooner had Shi Feng's figure disappeared into the dappled sunlight than a dark shape detached itself from the oak's shadow. In moments, it solidified into a young man cloaked in black. His wide eyes burned with astonishment. Shi Feng had sensed him. The stranger's heart pounded. In all his years of hiding, no one, least of all someone patrolling for the king, had ever perceived his presence. A single thrilling realization washed over him. This patrolman was no ordinary guard. Silently, he melted back into the shade, resolve hardening in his chest. Fate had just introduced him to a far more formidable opponent than himself, and far more intriguing. He never managed to pinpoint where Shi Feng had gone, and in the end, he left with nothing but frustration. Maybe it's the power of that zombie martial soul, the young man muttered, then set off in the direction Shi Feng had disappeared. His quarry had finally revealed himself. Now was the moment to strike. After all, it wouldn't be unusual for a 6-year-old to drown in this river. Nobody would suspect foul play. Below the surface, Shi Feng had already stripped off his clothes and slipped beneath the current, sinking until the riverbed swallowed him. The water here ran deep and teemed with fish. Catching dinner was as effortless as reaching out a hand. He hummed softly under his breath, casually scooping up a wriggling perch. Suddenly, he froze. A soft, irregular crunch of footsteps drifted downriver through the water. The breath that accompanied those steps was strange. Worse, it was unmistakably human. Shi Feng's heart thumped. Someone was wading toward him. On the muddy bank above, a pale boy in dark clothes paused beside Shi Feng's discarded garments. He stood perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to the hidden currents. The odd breath shimmered in the air around him, more pronounced than any Shi Feng had sensed before. Shi Feng hesitated only a moment, then surged upward. He broke the surface, eyes bright with curiosity and caution. The boy met his gaze with an unsettling stillness, as though he'd been waiting all along. Shi Feng studied him, trying to read what lay behind that strange, unwavering stare. "You're Shi Feng?" The young man's tone was icy, his face expressionless. "Division 16 has issued the order. You're marked for death." Shi Feng narrowed his eyes, unsettled by the stranger's arrogance. "I am Shi Feng. Who are you?" A glint of murderous intent sparked in the youth's gaze. "I'm the one sent to drag you down to hell." Before Shi Feng could gather his wits, the boy leapt into the river and struck out through the water, straight at him. "You've got to be insane!" Shi Feng cursed, whirling on his heel and sprinting away. The raw killing intent radiating from the young attacker left no doubt that this was no empty threat. At only 6 years old, Shi Feng felt a surge of panic. Why did this stranger want him dead? But with those gray eyes fixed on him, he knew he couldn't afford to stay and find out. He had to run. Shi Feng didn't have time to question strange instincts. He just swam. He pushed his legs through the water in long, powerful strokes, but the youth behind him was even faster. Like a hunting spirit given form, that young man's figure blurred as he drew on his soul energy, closing the distance in heartbeats. Being chased down for the first time, Shi Feng felt panic flare through him, but he also sensed something remarkable about his pursuer. A fierce power lurking just beneath a killing intent. Before he could formulate a plan, the young man lunged and caught him around the torso, driving both of them back toward the water's surface. In that instant of impact, Shi Feng choked on a mouthful of water and realized his opponent had misjudged him. He was no ordinary youth. Even unassisted, Shi Feng's physical strength was close to 1,000 jin. With a touch of soul power, Another few hundred jin of force bolstered his limbs. His eyes flashed white-hot determination. With a roar, Shi Feng unleashed a sudden, overwhelming burst of strength. The river churned and foamed around them as he turned the tables on the would-be attacker, determined to fight his way out rather than be dragged under. Shi Feng didn't hesitate. With a sudden twist of his wrist, he pried the young assassin's hands apart and drove him under the surface of the water. The boy's eyes went wide with shock as Shi Feng's weight pinned him down. He couldn't move an inch. A crushing force pressed into the top of his skull, rattling his senses. This kid's strength, it had to be supernatural. No, it couldn't be just innate talent. It was beyond that, truly monstrous. He cursed the investigator in his mind for glossing over such critical intel with a single offhand note about special abilities. That had to be a lie. Even at full blessing, his own soul power barely lifted him to 1,000 jin of strength. Yet he could feel this perverted child's force easily surpassing that mark. Without his martial spirit's aid, he'd have drowned here beneath Shi Feng's grip. Realizing his struggle was futile, the young man stilled himself. Soul energy surged through his veins, coalescing in his left hand. In an instant, a gleaming sword formed in his palm. Adopting a reverse grip, he thrust the blade upward toward Shi Feng's chest. Shi Feng barely registered the flash of steel before it was too late. The boy didn't even look back as he struck, every motion razor-sharp as if rehearsed 1,000 times. Shi Feng couldn't afford to hesitate, yet in that instant of decision, agony ripped through his chest. He stared down in disbelief. A slender sword had driven deep between his ribs, straight for his heart. The young attacker hovered a few feet off the ground, face pinched in a calm, merciless mask. Shi Feng's vision blurred. He forced out a single, furious word. "Why? You're just a child. Why kill me?" The boy's eyes were cold and distant. "Someone ordered it," he said softly. "It's a shame to lose such a prodigy, but you had to die." With a faint hiss, the blade slipped free and vanished into thin air. Blood gushed from Shi Feng's wound, drenching his tunic in scarlet. "It should be you who dies," he rasped, voice dropping to an icy whisper. Under the boy's horrified gaze, Shi Feng's body stiffened. His eyes snapped open, empty, unblinking. A grim smile curled on his blood-stained lips as he rose, his movements stiff and unnatural, like a creature returned from the grave. Shi Feng's eyes went dark, like twin abysses that threatened to swallow the boy's soul. In an instant, the transformation was complete. The wounds on Shi Feng's body sealed shut, and his fingernails twisted into razor-sharp black claws. With a fluid motion, he drove one claw straight into the boy's abdomen. A surge of corpse poison erupted within the youngster, eating away at him from the inside. The boy's limbs went limp. He clung desperately to consciousness even as his body collapsed under the toxin's assault. How is this possible?" he choked out, terror strangling his voice. He had never felt fear like this. All his assumptions about this child were shattered. This was no ordinary kid, but a living specter of death. Shi Feng said nothing. He hauled the poisoned boy up onto the riverbank and laid him on the grass. There, the boy's flesh sizzled and blackened under the toxin's corrosive power. But Shi Feng knelt beside him, protectively shielding the boy's head. He wasn't here to kill the child, at least not yet. The boy was barely 6 years old and had never left Holy Soul Village. Someone wanted him dead, and Shi Feng needed answers. With cold determination, he searched the boy's fading eyes for clues. Who was behind this attack? And why target an innocent child? Shi Feng braced himself. As the corpse poison spread like wildfire through the boy's veins, only one thing mattered now, uncovering the truth before it was too late. Shi Feng slipped on his tunic with deliberate calm, meeting the young assailant's terrified stare without flinching. The boy's lips trembled, sweat slicked his brow. Only moments ago he'd nearly succeeded in ending Shi Feng's life, but clearly underestimated his target. Shi Feng buttoned the last clasp and turned a hard gaze on the youth. "Who sent you to kill me?" The boy's Adam's apple bobbed, but he shook his head so weakly the motion seemed painful. I don't know." Shi Feng's brow tightened. "Then tell me who you are." The boy's voice cracked with fear. "An assassin." Shi Feng felt a sudden chill. A hired killer. He'd assumed this was a lone madman. He stepped forward, voice low and steady. "Speak the name of your employer, and I promise I'll spare your life." Hope glimmered in the boy's ashen eyes, but it died almost at once. He clutched his wounded side, his breath ragged. The crude blade that struck him had carved deep. He knew he wouldn't survive long. Silence stretched between them. Shi Feng's pulse thrummed in his temples. This boy held the thread that might unravel a far larger conspiracy, and unless he spoke, Shi Feng might never learn who had marked him for death. He didn't even know who had hired him. Ever since he'd chosen the assassin's life, he'd been ready to die, but he never expected his end to come so soon, nor at the hands of a mere child. He shook his head. I have no information on my employer. Stop wasting your breath. His expression darkened. After I'm dead, far more powerful killers will take my place. You can't hide forever. Once we set our sights on you, your only destiny is death. A flash of anger surged through Shi Feng's chest. He wasn't afraid of legions of assassins. At worst, he'd hole up in the Holy Soul village and have Tang Hao pick them off one by one. But being told his life was forfeit kindled an uncomfortable, burning fury.